A 12-year-old boy walked into a room full of killers and asked them for permission to stop breathing. Not in those words, not with that kind of courage, but the meaning lived behind his eyes like a loaded gun with the safety already off. He stood near a broken jukebox in a forgotten diner somewhere outside Black Hollow, Colorado, soaking wet, bruised, shaking. And he looked at 6 scarred bikers wrapped in leather and gunpowder silence and whispered something that stopped every single one of them cold. No one in that diner would ever be the same again. And the most dangerous man in the room? He wasn't the one throwing punches at home. He was the one who recognized the boy's eyes, because he'd spent 20 years trying to forget his own. If you want to know what happened next, stay until the very end. This story will hit you in places you forgot you were still bleeding from. Drop a like right now, leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from, and let's ride this thing together. You're not ready for what's coming. But neither were they. The storm came sideways, not the kind that rolls in slow and gives you time to find shelter. This was the Colorado kind. The kind that drops out of a black sky like a fist and doesn't stop swinging until it's buried everything worth saving under 3 feet of silence. Snow mixed with freezing rain, turning Highway 191 into a dark mirror reflecting nothing but the occasional flash of headlights from trucks that weren't stupid enough to stop. But the grave saints were stopped. 6 bikes, 3 pickup trucks, 11 men who hadn't slept in 31 hours, parked in a gravel lot behind a diner that looked like it had been dying slowly since the Reagan administration. The neon sign above the entrance buzzed and flickered. Half the letters burned out so it read, "Eat," instead of whatever optimistic name someone gave it decades ago. The A kept stuttering like it was trying to decide whether to stay alive. Inside smelled like burnt coffee, old grease, and the kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones when you've been running too long from things that don't get tired. Maddox Creed sat in the corner booth with his back to the wall because that's where men like him always sat. Former Army. Mechanical engineer by training, enforcer by necessity, and a man who carried enough scar tissue, inside and out, to wallpaper a decent-sized room. His knuckles were permanently swollen from years of wrench work, and worse. His leather cut hung heavy on his shoulders, patches faded from road salt and rain, and miles that never seemed to lead anywhere that felt like home. He wasn't drinking, hadn't touched alcohol in 4 years, 7 months, and 11 days. Not since the night he almost didn't stop. The other saints filled the booths around him in various states of collapse. Reaper, road captain, 6'4", tattoos crawling up his neck like dark vines, sat across from him cleaning his fingernails with a pocket knife, his expression the same flat mask he'd worn since he came back from his second deployment, missing 2 friends and most of his ability to sleep. Bishop, the oldest member, white-bearded and thick-armed, dozed against the window with a half-eaten plate of hash browns going cold in front of him. Deacon nursed black coffee with hands that hadn't stopped shaking since his divorce finalized 3 weeks ago. Gunner stared at his phone, reading a text he'd already read 40 times, the one from his daughter that just said, "Don't call anymore." These weren't movie bikers. There were no gleaming chrome fantasies or Hollywood swagger. These were men who'd been broken by war, by poverty, by systems that chewed them up and spit them into margins where the only family available wore leather and rode loud enough to drown out the screaming inside their own heads. The waitress, a woman named Darla, who looked like she'd been pouring coffee since before most of them were born, refilled mugs without making eye contact. She'd seen enough men like this to know 2 things. They tipped well, and you didn't ask questions. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were the coffee machine hissing, the wind tearing at the roof, and Reaper's knife clicking against his thumbnail in a rhythm that sounded almost like a heartbeat. That's when the door opened. Not all the way. Just enough for the cold to knife through the room and make everyone look up with the instinct of men who'd spent their lives cataloging threats before they fully formed. A boy stood in the gap between the door and the frame. 12 years old. Maybe. Hard to tell with kids who'd been hungry long enough for it to show in the architecture of their face. His hoodie was soaked black with rain, hanging off a frame so thin it looked like the wind might fold him in half. A backpack hung from one shoulder. Not a school backpack, the kind you pack when you're not sure you're coming back. His sneakers were held together with duct tape. His jeans had mud on the knees. But it was his eyes that made Maddox set down his coffee mug. Those weren't a child's eyes. They were surveillance cameras. Scanning the room left to right, cataloging distance to the door, measuring the size of every man present, calculating threat levels with the cold efficiency of someone who'd been hit enough times to develop their own internal radar system. Maddox knew those eyes. He'd owned a pair just like them for most of his childhood. The boy didn't come inside. Not fully. He stood in the doorway, letting the cold pour in around him, like he hadn't decided yet whether the inside was more dangerous than the outside. His left hand gripped the door handle. His right hand stayed hidden inside the front pocket of his hoodie. Not because he had a weapon, because he was holding his own wrist. Maddox had seen that gesture before, too. It meant something was wrong underneath the sleeve, something the boy didn't want anyone to see. Darla noticed first. "Honey, you're letting all the cold in. Either come in or Leave him," Maddox said. Quiet. Not a suggestion. Darla looked at him, then at the boy, then back at Maddox. She'd been a waitress long enough to know when a man was reading something in a room that she couldn't see. She went back to wiping the counter. The boy's eyes landed on Maddox. Held there. 2 seconds. 5. 10. Something passed between them that nobody else in the room could have translated. A frequency only tuned by damage, broadcast only by survival. It was the look of one wounded animal recognizing another across a clearing, both of them too tired to run, both of them too broken to pretend they weren't bleeding. The boy took one step inside, then another. He walked past the bikers without looking at any of them directly, peripheral vision only. The way you move through a room when you've learned that direct eye contact can trigger the wrong kind of attention. He stopped near the old jukebox in the corner. It hadn't worked in years. The glass was cracked. The song list inside was yellowed and curling at the edges. He stood there. Just stood there. Not asking for food. Not asking for money. Not asking for help. Just existing in the warmest corner of a room full of strangers while the storm screamed outside like something trying to get in. Bishop opened one eye, looked at Maddox. Maddox gave the smallest shake of his head. Not yet. Reaper folded his knife closed and slid it into his pocket. That was his version of putting away a weapon in the presence of something fragile. It was the most gentle thing anyone had ever seen him do. Minutes passed. The coffee machine gurgled. Wind shrieked against the windows. The boy didn't sit down. Didn't take off his backpack. Didn't relax a single visible muscle in his body. Then he spoke. So quiet that only Maddox heard it from the nearest booth. So quiet it almost disappeared under the sound of the storm. "If I fall asleep here, will somebody wake me up?" Maddox's hand tightened around his coffee mug until the ceramic creaked. He knew what that question meant. He'd asked a version of it himself once, in a barracks bathroom at 3 in the morning, pressing a razor blade against his forearm and wondering if anyone would notice if he just got quieter and quieter until there was nothing left to hear. The boy wasn't asking about sleep. He was asking if disappearing would register on anyone's radar. He was asking if his existence had weight. Maddox swallowed something that tasted like 20 years of rust and ruin and unspoken damage. He looked at the boy. Really looked. The way you look at something when you're afraid that looking away might be the thing that kills it. "Yeah," Maddox said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. Broken gravel dragged across the pavement. "Yeah, kid, somebody will wake you up." The boy stared at him for a long time. Then he sat down on the floor next to the jukebox, pulled his knees to his chest, and closed his eyes. He didn't sleep. Maddox knew that. Kids like this didn't sleep in rooms full of strangers. They just closed their eyes and listened for footsteps. But he stayed. And in that staying, in that tiny, terrified act of almost trust, something shifted in the room that every single biker felt, but none of them would ever be able to name. Reaper looked at Maddox. His jaw was tight. "Who is he?" Reaper asked, low enough that the boy wouldn't hear. "Doesn't matter who he is," Maddox said. "Matters who's doing that to him." Reaper's eyes went to the boy's sleeve, the one the kid kept tugging down, the one that had slipped up just enough when he sat down to show the edge of something purple-black and swollen against skin that should have been unmarked. "I'll kill him," Reaper said. Flat, conversational, the way someone might say they were going to grab more coffee. "No," Maddox said. Give me one reason. Because the kid doesn't need another man solving problems with his hands right now. That landed somewhere deep in Reaper's chest. He leaned back against the booth and stared at the ceiling for a long time without blinking. Nobody slept that night. Not really. They took shifts without discussing it. One man always awake, always with eyes on the door, as if something might come through it looking for the boy. Maddox sat in his booth until dawn turned the windows gray, watching the kid's breathing pattern, counting the intervals between each flinch when the wind hit the building too hard. At 6:15 in the morning, the boy opened his eyes. He looked around the room with that same scanning precision. When he saw Maddox still sitting there, still watching, something flickered across his face. Not trust, not yet, but the faintest shadow of surprise that someone had stayed. He stood up, pulled his backpack on, walked toward the door. "Hey." The boy stopped but didn't turn around. "You got a name?" Maddox asked. Silence, the kind that vibrates. "Eli," the boy said, still facing the door. "Eli, I'm Maddox. You know where this place is now. You know how to find it." The boy nodded once. Then he was gone into the gray morning like smoke dissolving into cold air. Bishop waited until the door closed before he spoke. "That kid's in trouble, Maddox." "I know. Bad trouble." "I know. What are we going to do about it?" Maddox stared at the door, at the place where the boy had been. "We're going to be here tomorrow, and the day after that, and we're going to let him decide when he's ready to stop running. And if he doesn't come back?" Maddox didn't answer that, because the answer was the thing he was most afraid of. 3 days passed before Eli returned. The Saints had moved their operation to the garage behind the diner, a concrete block building that smelled like motor oil, cold metal, and the particular brand of industrial solitude that mechanics understand. Bikes in various states of disassembly lined the walls. Tools hung from pegboards. A space heater in the corner fought a losing battle against the Colorado winter seeping through cracks in the foundation. Maddox was elbow-deep in a 1987 Harley Softail when he heard the side door creak open. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge the sound, just kept working, letting the boy decide how far inside he wanted to come. Eli made it 4 steps past the threshold before stopping. Same backpack, same hoodie, new bruise, this one on his jaw, angled in a way that told Maddox exactly what size fist made it and exactly how much force was behind it. The boy watched Maddox work for 11 minutes without speaking. Maddox counted. "What's wrong with it?" Eli finally asked. "Carburetor's fouled, gummed up from sitting too long." "Can you fix it?" "Can fix anything that's willing to run again." Silence. But a different kind this time. Not the frightened silence of a cornered animal. The curious silence of someone who just heard something that sounded like it might not be about carburetors. Maddox pulled a wrench from the pegboard and held it out without looking at the boy. "Hold this." Eli hesitated. Then he took it. Their fingers didn't touch. Maddox made sure of that. He understood, in the way that only damaged people understand, that uninvited contact was a weapon, and the boy had been hit with enough weapons to last several lifetimes. They worked in silence for an hour. Maddox narrating the repair in short, flat sentences. "This is the float bowl, controls fuel flow. When it gets dirty, the engine chokes, starves, can't breathe right." He paused, hands deep in the machine's guts. "Lots of things stop working when they can't breathe right." Eli didn't respond, but he didn't leave either. When Reaper showed up at noon with a bag of gas station sandwiches, he set one on the workbench near Eli without comment, without eye contact, without any of the performative kindness that would have sent the boy running. Just a sandwich, just fuel, just the quiet acknowledgement that a human body needed feeding the same way an engine needed gasoline. Eli ate it in 4 bites while pretending he wasn't hungry. Reaper and Maddox exchanged a look over the boy's head, a look that communicated entire paragraphs in the space between heartbeats. How bad? Bad enough. What do? We wait, we watch, we don't spook him, but waiting was the hardest thing the grave saints had ever done. Because every day Eli came to the garage, he brought evidence, a limp he tried to hide, fingerprint bruises on his forearm in a pattern too precise to be accidental, a flinch so deeply wired that even the sound of Maddox dropping a socket wrench sent the boy's shoulders up around his ears like armor deploying. And every evening, every single evening, Eli left before dark, because whatever was happening to him happened after the sun went down. Bishop cornered Maddox in the back of the garage on the 5th day, voice low enough that the words seemed to crawl along the floor. I called a buddy of mine. Used to work family services down in Pueblo. And? Systems backed up 8 months minimum. Even if we filed today, even with evidence, they'd schedule a home visit sometime around summer. Maybe. Maddox stared at the old man. Summer. Summer. The kid doesn't have until summer, Bishop. I know that. You know that. But the system doesn't know that. The system has paperwork. The system has procedures. The system has a whole goddamn filing cabinet full of reasons why a 12-year-old boy gets to keep getting beat while somebody in an office finishes their coffee. Maddox's fist hit the workbench hard enough to rattle every tool on the pegboard. The sound echoed through the garage like a gunshot. From the corner, Eli's head snapped up. Survival radar activated, eyes wide, body already calculating the distance to the nearest exit. Maddox saw the boy's reaction, and something cracked inside his chest. A hairline fracture along a fault line that had been building pressure for decades. He unclenched his fist, flattened his palm on the workbench, breathed. Sorry, he said to Eli. Not a big performance. Just the word, quiet and real. Eli stared at him for a long time, studying the aftermath of the outburst the way a bomb tech studies a device, looking for secondary triggers. When he was satisfied that the explosion was over and wouldn't repeat, his shoulders dropped 1 inch. 1 inch. That 1 inch almost broke Maddox completely, because he understood what it cost a kid like Eli to lower his guard by even that much. He understood the mathematics of it. How many times you have to get hurt before your body develops its own defense system, before your shoulders become a fortress wall, before relaxing becomes the most dangerous thing you can do. The 7th night, Reaper didn't ask permission. He followed Eli, kept his distance. 300 yards, engine off, coasting through the back streets of Black Hollow on a bike that weighed 700 pounds and somehow made no more noise than a whisper. He tracked the boy through the frozen twilight to the edge of town where the houses thinned out and the trailers multiplied and the streetlights stopped pretending anyone was watching. Eli's destination was a single-wide trailer set back from a dirt road that turned to mud in the rain and ice in the cold. The siding was peeling. The porch sagged. A pickup truck sat in the yard with a cracked windshield and a bumper sticker that had faded past legibility. Reaper parked 200 yards out, killed his engine, and watched through the kind of darkness that only exists in towns where nobody bothers to look. The front door opened before Eli reached it. A man, 6 feet, maybe 220, tank top despite the cold, beer can in one hand, the other hand free, and Reaper understood with the specific clarity of someone trained in violence that the free hand was free on purpose. The man said something Reaper couldn't hear. Eli's body language changed. Everything compressed, everything pulled inward, like a turtle trying to disappear inside its own shell. Then the man grabbed the boy by the collar of his hoodie and yanked him inside with enough force that Eli's head hit the doorframe. The sound traveled through the cold air like a crack in ice. The door slammed, and through the broken windows, the ones with plastic sheeting instead of glass, Reaper heard screaming. He sat in the darkness for 45 minutes, hands gripping his handlebars so hard the leather creaked, jaw clenched until his molars ached. Every fiber of his training telling him to walk up those steps, kick down that door, and end this with the kind of permanent efficiency that 12 years of military service had hardened into his muscle memory. But he heard Maddox's voice in his head, heard it with the awful clarity of truth. The kid doesn't need another man solving problems with his hands. Reaper rode back to the garage at midnight, walked inside, stood in front of Maddox with snow melting off his shoulders and something broken rearranging itself behind his eyes. I found where he lives, Reaper said. How bad? Worse than us. That sentence hit the room like a detonation, because every man in the Grave Saints carried damage, burns, scars, nightmares that woke them up choking on sounds from places they'd never be able to leave. And the idea that a 12-year-old boy was carrying something heavier than all of that, something worse, was the kind of knowledge that rearranges the furniture inside a man's chest and leaves nothing in the right place. Deacon stood up from his stool. "Give me the address." "Sit down," Maddox said. "Give me the goddamn address, Maddox." "And then what? You kick his door in? Break his jaw? Feel better for 20 minutes? Then what happens to the kid? What happens when the cops show up and see a biker with priors standing over a bleeding man in a trailer? Who goes to prison? Who takes care of Eli then?" Deacon stared at him. The anger in his eyes wasn't about a stranger's kid. It was about his own children, the ones he'd lost custody of, the ones who stopped answering his calls, the ones whose absence was a wound that never scabbed over because he kept picking at it every night in the dark. "Then what the hell do we do?" Deacon whispered. Maddox looked around the garage. At the tools, at the bikes, at the men who'd followed him through worse than this. Men who'd buried brothers and survived wars and ridden through storms that should have killed them. "We do what nobody ever did for us," he said. "We build something instead of breaking something." "What does that look like?" "I don't know yet." Maddox's voice was raw, honest, the kind of honesty that only exists when a man stops performing strength and just stands in his own wreckage. "But I know what it doesn't look like. It doesn't look like violence. Not this time." Reaper leaned against the wall, arms crossed, face unreadable. "The stepfather's going to keep hitting him." "I know. Every night." "I know." "How long do we wait?" Maddox stared at the Harley he'd been rebuilding, the one Eli had helped him with, the one they'd worked on in silence, while the boy learned that not every set of hands in the world was built for hurting. "We don't wait," Maddox said. "We plan. And when we move in a way that makes sure that man can never touch that boy again. Not tomorrow, not next week, not ever." The garage went quiet except for the space heater clicking and the wind pressing against the walls like something listening. Nobody slept that night either. But for the first time, it wasn't because of their own nightmares. It was because of someone else's. And somewhere across town, in a trailer with broken windows and plastic sheeting and the smell of beer and fear soaked into every surface, a 12-year-old boy lay on a bare mattress staring at the ceiling with the kind of stillness that only exists in children who've learned that movement attracts attention and attention attracts pain. Eli Mercer held his own wrist in the dark, feeling his pulse, counting the beats, wondering if the man in the garage, the one with scarred knuckles and a voice like broken gravel, had meant what he said. "Somebody'll wake you up." He wanted to believe it, but believing was the most dangerous thing Eli knew how to do. Because every time he'd believed before, believed a promise, believed a smile, believed the words, "it won't happen again," the aftermath had taught him that hope was just a setup for a harder fall. Outside, the Colorado wind howled through Black Hollow like a warning. And inside that garage, 6 damaged men sat in silence, building a plan they didn't have yet for a boy they barely knew, because something about his eyes had reached into the locked rooms inside their chests and turned on lights that hadn't worked in years. But none of them knew what was coming next. None of them knew about the file. The manila folder tucked inside Eli's backpack, the one he never let anyone touch, the one he slept with pressed against his chest like armor. The one that contained a truth so dark it would change everything the grave saints thought they understood about the boy, about the stepfather, and about why the system had already failed Eli Mercer long before they ever found him standing by a broken jukebox in a dying diner. And none of them, not Maddox, not Reaper, not a single scarred man in that room, was ready for what that file would reveal. The file found Maddox before Maddox found the file. 3 days after Reaper's midnight reconnaissance, Eli left his backpack in the garage. Not on purpose. The boy never left anything anywhere on purpose. Every object he owned stayed within arm's reach at all times, inventoried and guarded with the obsessive precision of someone who'd learned that anything left unattended would be taken, broken, or used against him. But that Tuesday afternoon, something different happened. Maddox had been teaching Eli how to gap spark plugs. A simple job, repetitive, the kind of task that lets your hand stay busy while your brain slowly unclenches. They'd been working side by side for 2 hours in comfortable silence when Bishop came through the garage door carrying a box of old motorcycle parts he'd picked up from a swap meet in Pueblo. The box slipped, Metal hit concrete with a sound like a car wreck compressed into half a second, chrome and steel scattering across the floor in a cascade of sharp, ringing chaos. Eli was gone before the echo died. Not out the door, under the workbench, knees pulled up, arms over his head, body compressed into the smallest possible target. A position so practiced, so geometrically precise, that Maddox understood the boy had assumed it hundreds of times before. Maybe thousands. The muscle memory of a child who'd been conditioned to make himself disappear at the first sign of noise because noise meant impact, and impact meant pain. Bishop froze, looked at Maddox with an expression that contained entire novels of horror and helplessness compressed into the space between his eyebrows. Maddox lowered himself slowly to the floor, not reaching, not touching, just getting down to the boy's level so Eli wouldn't have to look up at another large man standing over him. It was parts, Maddox said quietly. Just parts falling, nothing else. Eli didn't move. His breathing was shallow and rapid, 35 breaths per minute, maybe more. The hyperventilation of a nervous system stuck in a loop it couldn't escape. You're in the garage. You're with me. Nobody's going to touch you. Seconds passed. 10. 20. The space heater clicked. Outside, wind scraped against the building like fingernails against a coffin lid. Eli's breathing slowed. His arms came down 1 inch at a time. When his eyes finally opened, they were wet. Not crying, not yet, but holding back something that had been building pressure for years. He crawled out from under the workbench without making eye contact with anyone, walked to the corner where he'd been sitting, picked up his jacket, and left without his backpack. Maddox noticed 20 minutes later. The bag was slumped against the wall near the jukebox parts they used as a doorstop. Faded blue fabric, one strap torn, a zipper that didn't fully close. He picked it up intending to set it somewhere safe for when Eli came back. That's when the manila folder slid out. It hit the floor and opened on impact, pages fanning across the concrete like a hand of cards dealt by something cruel. Maddox didn't mean to look, but the first page landed face up at his feet, and the words were large enough to read without bending down. Department of Human Services. Case file number 07-4419. Subject: Mercer, Eli Thomas. Status: closed. Insufficient evidence. Maddox stared at those last 2 words until they burned themselves into the back of his skull. Insufficient evidence. He picked up the pages. He shouldn't have. He knew he shouldn't have. But the same instinct that had kept him alive through 2 deployments and 15 years of outlaw road, the instinct that told him when a situation was about to go from bad to catastrophic, was screaming so loud it drowned out every ethical objection his brain tried to mount. There were 7 pages. 7 pages documenting 3 separate reports filed over 18 months. The first by a teacher at Black Hollow Elementary, who noticed bruising on Eli's arms inconsistent with playground injuries. The second by an emergency room nurse at Valley Regional who treated the boy for a fractured wrist. Patient states he fell from a bicycle, mechanism inconsistent with reported injury. The third by a neighbor who heard screaming at the trailer 4 nights in a row and finally called because she couldn't sleep through it anymore. 3 reports. 3 investigations. 3 times the file was opened, examined, and closed. Insufficient evidence, unable to substantiate. Home visit conducted. No immediate danger observed. Maddox read the caseworker's notes from the final visit. Dated 8 months ago. The handwriting was neat and professional and completely inadequate. Stepfather cooperative and forthcoming. Home clean and orderly at time of visit. Child appeared well nourished and denied any abuse when questioned. No visible injuries observed. Case closed per supervisor recommendation. Child appeared well nourished. Maddox thought about the way Eli ate, fast, hunched over his food, one arm curved around his plate like a barrier. The way starving people eat. The way soldiers eat in combat zones. The way you eat when you've learned that food can be taken away at any moment, and the only defense is speed. Denied any abuse when questioned. Of course he denied it. Because the questioning happened in the trailer, with the stepfather in the next room. With the thin walls and the listening ears, and the absolute certainty that whatever Eli said to the caseworker would be paid for in full after the caseworker's car pulled away. Maddox's hands were shaking, not from fear. from something older than fear, a rage so deep and so familiar that it felt less like an emotion and more like a geological event. Tectonic plates shifting inside his chest, grinding against fault lines that had been building pressure since he was 9 years old, and his own father taught him the same lessons Eli was learning now. Don't tell anyone. They won't believe you. And if they do believe you, they can't help you. And if they try to help you, it'll only make it worse. He put the pages back in the folder, put the folder back in the backpack, set the backpack exactly where Eli had left it, angled the same way, with the same lean against the wall. Then he walked outside into the freezing air and stood behind the garage with his hands pressed flat against the concrete wall, breathing steam into the darkness until his pulse dropped below 100. Reaper found him there 12 minutes later. "What happened?" Reaper asked. "He's been reported 3 times. Reaper's eyes narrowed. "To who?" "Human Services. Twice by mandated reporters. A teacher, a nurse. 3rd time by a neighbor. And?" "Closed. All 3. Insufficient evidence." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, pressurized with the kind of fury that doesn't explode because it's been compressed so tight it becomes something denser and more dangerous than noise. It becomes intent. "So the system knows," Reaper said slowly. "The system knows. And the system doesn't care. The system cares about paperwork. The system cares about liability. The system cares about closing files and clearing caseloads and making sure nobody has to stay late on a Friday to deal with a kid in a trailer who's too scared to say the right words when a stranger and business casual asks him if everything's okay at home." Reaper leaned against the wall beside Maddox. 2 large men in the dark behind a garage in a dying town in the middle of a Colorado winter, standing shoulder to shoulder with the weight of knowledge that most people spend their entire lives pretending doesn't exist. "So what now?" Reaper asked. "Now it's different." "Different how?" "Before, we were waiting, giving the kid space, letting the system work. And now?" Maddox turned his head and looked at Reaper with eyes that had gone somewhere cold and calculated and absolutely certain. "Now we know the system already worked, and it chose to look away." The meeting happened at midnight in the garage with the doors locked and the lights dimmed to a single fluorescent tube buzzing overhead like a dying insect. 6 men sat on overturned milk crates and engine blocks. Their shadows stretched across the concrete floor in shapes that looked like the silhouettes of men planning something they couldn't take back. Maddox stood. Everyone else sat. That was how it worked when the subject was serious enough to require standing. "I need to say something before we start," Maddox said. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room. Not because it's club business, because it's his business, the kid's. And if he finds out we know before he's ready to tell us, we lose him." Nods. No questions. The Saints understood operational security better than most Special Forces units because they'd learned it in places where the consequences of failure weren't court-martial. They were coffins. Maddox laid it out. The file. The 3 reports. The closures. The caseworker's notes that described a clean home and a cooperative stepfather and a well-nourished child, while a 12-year-old boy learned to hide bruises so well that professionals trained to find them couldn't see what was right in front of their faces. When he finished, the silence in the garage was the kind that precedes either violence or decision, the kind that sits in a room like a loaded weapon and waits to see which hand picks it up. Deacon spoke first. His voice was thick. "My ex-wife filed a restraining order against me. I didn't touch her. Didn't touch my kids. Never raised a hand in my life. But the court believed her because she had a lawyer and I had a public defender who couldn't remember my name. They took my kids based on paperwork. Gave them to a woman who—" He stopped, swallowed. "They took my kids because the system was efficient, and now the same system can't protect this boy because it's not efficient enough. You tell me how that works." Nobody could tell him. Because it didn't work. That was the point. Gunnar hadn't spoken in the meeting until now. He sat in the corner with his phone face down on his knee, the phone his daughter never answered. And when he finally opened his mouth, his voice was so quiet it almost evaporated before it reached the middle of the room. "How old is his mother?" The question surprised everyone. Maddox paused. "I don't know. Late 30s, maybe." Haven't met her. She ever call it in? Not in the file. Why? Same reason they never call it in. Because she's scared. Because she's trapped. Because leaving costs money and staying costs everything else. And she's probably been doing the math every night for years trying to figure out which cost she can survive. Gunnar nodded slowly. My mother did that math. She got it wrong. Nobody asked what he meant. Nobody needed to. Bishop cleared his throat. The sound was like gravel shifting. I know a lawyer, Curtis Webb. Not a good man, said. Drinks too much. Got disbarred once in Nevada for something he won't talk about. Got reinstated on a technicality. But he owes me. Owes the club, more specifically. We pulled his daughter out of a situation in Grand Junction 2 years back. One phone call, and he'll do whatever we need. What kind of lawyer? Maddox asked. Family law, custody, emergency protective orders. Can he move fast? Fast enough? If we give him what he needs. We don't have evidence, not legal evidence. We have a closed file and a gut feeling. Bishop leaned forward, his white beard catching the fluorescent light. Then we get evidence, real evidence, the kind the system can't close a file on. Reaper uncrossed his arms. How? Documentation, photographs, timestamps, medical records if we can get the mother to take the boy to a different hospital, somewhere outside the county where the reports haven't been quashed. We build a case so clean and so heavy that no judge in Colorado can set it on a shelf and forget about it. That takes time, Maddox said. Everything worth doing takes time. He doesn't have time, Bishop. Then we protect him while we build it. How do you protect someone who goes home every night to the thing that's killing him? The question dropped into the room like a stone into deep water. Rings expanding outward through the silence, touching every man in the circle, reminding each of them of their own version of the same impossible equation. How do you save someone who isn't ready to be saved? How do you pull someone out of a fire when they keep walking back into the burning building because the burning building is the only home they've ever known? Maddox looked down at his hands. Scarred, swollen, grease embedded so deep in the creases of his knuckles it would never come out. Hands that had built engines and broken jaws, and once, in a moment he'd spent 4 years trying to forget, held a razor blade against his own skin and pressed just hard enough to feel the question of whether existing was worth the cost of admission. We make the garage his safe zone, Maddox said finally. We extend the hours. Somebody's always here. We feed him, we give him work, we keep his body in this building for as many hours per day as we can manage. And we watch for the moment, the specific moment, when it escalates past what he can survive. Because it will. Men like that don't plateau. They accelerate. And when that moment comes, Reaper asked, when that moment comes, we move. Move how? I don't know yet, but it won't be halfway, and it won't be temporary. When we move, we end it. The word end hung in the air with the particular weight of language that means more than its dictionary definition. Every man in the room heard it differently. Some heard extraction. Some heard legal intervention. Some heard something darker, something that lived in the spaces between the law and the night, and the particular skill set of men who'd been trained to solve permanent problems with permanent solutions. Maddox didn't clarify. Not because he didn't know what he meant. Because he didn't want to know what he meant. Not yet. The plan started the next day. Reaper began parking his bike on the road near Eli's trailer every evening. Not close enough to be seen. Far enough that the rumble of an idling Harley V-twin would carry through the cold air and reach the boy's ears through the thin trailer walls. A reminder. A signal. We're here. We know. You're not invisible. Bishop called Curtis Webb. The lawyer showed up at the garage on Thursday afternoon in a suit that was 20 years old and a car that was 30, carrying a briefcase with a broken clasp and the particular expression of a man who understood exactly what he was being asked to do and exactly what it would cost him if it went wrong. I need the mother, Webb said, flipping through the case file Maddox had copied before returning the original to Eli's backpack. Without her cooperation, we're building a house on sand. A judge needs a complainant. Needs testimony, needs a name on a petition that isn't a motorcycle club. She's scared, Maddox said. They're always scared. That's it. That's the architecture of the whole thing. He builds the cage out of fear and then convinces her she's staying because she wants to. How do we reach her? Webb looked up from the file. You don't. Not directly, not you. A group of bikers approaching a domestic violence victim is the fastest way to send her deeper into the cage. She needs to come to you. And if she doesn't? Then we need something else. Something that changes the math. Like what? Webb closed the file. Like the boy talking, on record, to someone with authority. That was a dead end, and everyone knew it. Eli had been questioned 3 times by trained professionals, and 3 times he'd denied everything. Not because he didn't want help, because he'd learned, through bruises and broken bones and the specific curriculum of living with a predator, that asking for help was just another word for delayed punishment. The days shortened, the cold deepened. Eli kept coming to the garage, and the Saints kept building a cocoon around him so slowly and so carefully that the boy didn't feel the walls going up. He only felt the temperature changing, warmer, safer, the kind of environment where flinching gradually stopped being the default response to sound. Maddox taught him valve adjustments, primary chain tension, how to read the color of a spark plug and diagnose an engine's health from the residue it left behind. Dark and sooty means it's running rich, Maddox said one afternoon, holding a plug up to the light. Getting too much fuel, not enough air, engine can't burn clean. Eli studied the plug with the kind of focus that had nothing to do with motorcycles. What if it's always been running rich? Then you rejet the carb, change the air filter, open things up, let it breathe. What if the damage is already done? Maddox set the plug down, looked at the boy with the full weight of everything he understood about damage and survival and the slow, painful process of rebuilding something that had been running wrong for too long. Engines are patient. Long as there's a spark, they'll try again. Eli didn't respond. But his hands tightened around the wrench he was holding, and Maddox saw the boy's jaw work. The small, almost imperceptible movement of someone biting down on words that wanted out but couldn't find safe passage. Then came the night that broke the timeline. Eli arrived at the garage at 9:15 on a Wednesday evening, after dark. He'd never come after dark before. The after-dark hours belonged to the trailer, to the stepfather, to whatever happened behind those walls that the system had decided wasn't worth investigating. The boy's arrival triggered every alarm in Maddox's body simultaneously. Eli stood in the doorway without speaking. His hoodie was torn at the collar. Not worn torn, ripped torn, grabbed torn. There was blood on his lower lip, dried, cracked, the kind of blood that comes from a split sustained hours ago and left to clot without treatment. His left eye was swelling shut in real time, the skin around it darkening from red to purple like a time-lapse of damage unfolding. But it was his right arm that made Maddox's vision narrow to a tunnel. The boy was holding it against his body at an angle that shouldn't exist, an angle that Maddox had seen in combat, in men who'd taken shrapnel or fallen wrong or been thrown from vehicles moving at speed, the angle of bone that had been forced past its tolerance. Eli, Maddox's voice came from somewhere deep, somewhere below language. Come inside. The boy took 2 steps and stopped. His breathing was irregular, hitching every third inhale. The pattern of someone whose ribs were either bruised or cracked, and every breath was a negotiation with pain. He knows, Eli whispered. Maddox went cold. Knows what? About here, about you, about the bikes. The garage seemed to contract, walls pressing inward, air thickening. Every man present felt the atmospheric shift, the specific, unmistakable compression that happens when a situation jumps from dangerous to critical with no transition in between. How? Maddox asked. I don't know. Someone saw me. Someone told him. I don't know. The boy's voice was fracturing. The carefully maintained composure, the armor he'd been building since before he could ride a bike, was cracking in real time, and underneath it was something so raw and so young and so terrified that it barely sounded human. It sounded like a small animal that had finally stopped running because there was nowhere left to run. He said, if I come back here, he'll... Eli stopped, looked at the floor, then at Maddox. He said he knows where this place is now. Reaper straightened up from the workbench so slowly it looked tectonic. Deacon's hand stopped shaking for the first time in weeks. They went still. Completely still. The the stillness of a man who'd just found something more important than his own pain. Gunnar put his phone face down on the bench and didn't touch it again. Bishop pushed himself off his stool with the deliberate, aching precision of an old man whose body hurt everywhere, but whose mind had just found a gear it hadn't used in 20 years. And Maddox looked at the broken boy in the doorway and understood with absolute crystalline clarity that the timeline had just collapsed. The careful plan, the legal strategy, the documentation, the slow, methodical construction of a case that would protect Eli through the proper channels and the proper procedures and the proper mechanisms of a system that had already demonstrated, 3 times in writing, that it was incapable of protecting anyone. All of it was done. Because the stepfather knew now. And men like that, men who beat children with the lights off and the music up, didn't respond to exposure with retreat. They responded with escalation, with punishment so severe it ensured the child would never risk exposure again. The math had changed, and the new math only had 2 answers. Maddox crouched in front of Eli, eye level. Close enough that the boy could see his face in the dim fluorescent light, but not so close that he'd feel trapped. Eli, I'm going to ask you something and I need the real answer. Not the answer you give caseworkers. Not the answer you give teachers. The real one. The boy's good eye, the one that wasn't swelling shut, locked onto Maddox's face with the intensity of someone staring at the last lifeboat leaving a sinking ship. Is your mother safe right now? Eli's chin trembled. 1 second, 2. No. The word was so small it almost didn't exist. But it detonated inside the garage with the force of something that had been buried too long and too deep and had finally broken the surface. Maddox stood up, turned to face the room. 6 men looked back at him. 6 faces. 6 different versions of the same expression. The expression of damaged men who'd spent their entire lives being told they were the problem, being told they were the danger, being told that society would be better off without them, and who were now standing in a garage at 9:30 on a Wednesday night with the knowledge that they were the only thing standing between a child and the kind of darkness that polite society refused to acknowledge existed. Call Webb, Maddox said to Bishop. Tell him it's tonight. Tonight? Bishop reached for his phone. He'll need to file an emergency petition. Wake up a judge. That could take... Then it takes what it takes. But we move tonight. Maddox. Reaper's voice was steel wrapped in something quieter. If we do this wrong, the kid loses everything. We lose everything. There's no version of this where we get a second chance. I know. Do you? Because right now you're looking at this like a soldier and not like a strategist. And soldiers die for causes. Strategists win them. Maddox turned and faced Reaper fully. 2 men who'd bled together and buried friends together and ridden through things that couldn't be described in peacetime language, standing on opposite sides of a decision that would define everything that came after. What do you suggest? Maddox asked. I suggest we get the mother first, right now, before the stepfather figures out the kid is here and comes looking. And then? And then we put them somewhere he can't reach, and then we let the lawyer do what lawyers do. And if the law doesn't move fast enough, Reaper paused. His jaw tightened. Then we have a different conversation. Maddox held Reaper's gaze for 3 seconds. Then he nodded. Deacon, Gunner, take the truck. Go to the trailer. Get the mother. What if he's there? Deacon asked. Then you get her anyway. And if he tries to stop us? Maddox looked at Deacon with eyes that had gone somewhere beyond anger, beyond planning, beyond the careful restraint he'd been maintaining for weeks. Something ancient and ferocious and absolutely quiet lived behind that look. The same thing that lives inside any creature that has decided, with permanent finality, that the thing it's protecting matters more than the thing it might have to do. Then you make sure he understands that stopping you isn't an option. Deacon and Gunner were out the door in 30 seconds. The truck's engine turned over with a cough that became a growl that became distance. Maddox turned back to Eli. The boy was still standing in the doorway, cradling his broken arm, watching the room with eyes that contained something new, something that hadn't been there before. Not trust, not yet, but the first, fragile, terrifying recognition that he might have been wrong about the world, that the monsters he'd been running from his entire life might not be the only kind that existed, that some monsters guard doors instead of breaking them down. Outside, the Colorado night pressed against the garage walls like a held breath. And somewhere across Black Hollow, a pickup truck carrying two scarred bikers drove toward a rotting trailer where a woman sat in the dark, waiting for something she'd stopped believing would ever come. The headlights cut through the snow like blades. And nothing, not the law, not the cold, not the man inside that trailer, was going to stop what happened next, because the grave saints had just crossed the line, and there was no crossing back. The truck's headlights found the trailer at 10:07 p.m. Deacon killed the engine 60 yards out and let the vehicle coast the remaining distance on frozen gravel, tires crunching through ice crystals that sounded like small bones breaking under the weight. Gunner sat in the passenger seat with both hands flat on his thighs, a position he'd learned in his first deployment, the position you held when you needed your hands to be ready for anything but couldn't afford to let them decide what that anything was before your brain caught up. The trailer looked worse at night. The porch light was busted. The only illumination came from a window on the far side where a television flickered blue and white behind plastic sheeting that billowed inward with each gust of wind like the trailer itself was trying to breathe. The stepfather's truck was gone. Deacon noticed this first. He pointed at the empty patch of mud where tire tracks carved deep grooves into the frozen ground, still fresh enough that the edges hadn't crystallized. "Gone," Deacon said. "How long?" "Tracks haven't iced over. 20 minutes, maybe less." Gunner stared at the trailer. "Where'd he go?" That question sat between them like a grenade with a pulled pin, because there were only two answers. Either the stepfather had gone somewhere unrelated, a bar, a store, another woman, or he'd gone looking. For the boy. For the garage. For the men he now knew existed. "We get the mother," Deacon said. "We deal with the other thing after." They stepped out of the truck into air so cold it felt personal, like the night itself had opinions about what they were doing. Deacon zipped his jacket and crossed the yard in 6 strides, boots punching through a crust of frozen mud with each step. Gunner followed 3 paces behind, scanning the dark perimeter with the unconscious precision of a man who'd spent years clearing buildings in places where the furniture was rigged to kill you. Deacon knocked on the door, 3 times. Not hard, not soft. The knock of someone who needed to be heard without triggering panic. Nothing. He knocked again. "Ma'am, my name's Deacon. I'm a friend of your son's." Silence from inside, but not empty silence. The specific, pressurized silence of someone holding their breath on the other side of a door, trying to determine whether the voice belonged to salvation or another shape of danger. "Eli's safe," Deacon added. "He's at the garage. With Maddox. He asked us to come get you." A lock turned. Not the deadbolt. The chain. The door opened 3 inches, stopped by the remaining lock, and a face appeared in the gap. Sarah Mercer was 36 years old and looked 50. Not from age, from erosion. The kind that happens when fear becomes your primary atmosphere and every day costs more than it gives back. Her eyes were swollen from crying or from being hit or from both. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail so tight it seemed to be holding her skull together. She wore a flannel shirt buttoned wrong, one side higher than the other, the way you dress when your hands are shaking too badly to match holes with buttons. "Where is he?" she whispered. "Where's Eli?" "Safe, I promise you." "You can't promise me that. Nobody can promise me that." Deacon swallowed. She was right, and the fact that she knew she was right, that she'd learned through repeated experience that promises were just words people used to feel better about situations they couldn't control, hit him somewhere he wasn't prepared to be hit. "Okay," he said. "You're right, I can't promise. But I can tell you that right now, your son is in a garage with 5 men who would rather die than let anything happen to him. And he asked us to come get you. That's real. Whatever else I can or can't guarantee, that part is real." Sarah stared at him through the 3-inch gap, measuring, calculating, running the same risk assessment that every abuse victim runs every time a stranger offers help. Because help has conditions, and conditions have consequences, and consequences have a way of landing on the people who can absorb them the least. "He's hurt," she said. Not a question. "Yes." "How bad?" "His arm. We think it's broken. Sarah's face didn't change. That was the part that gutted Deacon. The absence of surprise. The way she received the information that her son's arm was broken with the same flat affect that someone might use to acknowledge the weather. Not because she didn't care. Because this wasn't new. Because broken bones had become a recurring event in her life. A seasonal occurrence. Something that happened with the same grim regularity as winter itself. "He'll come back," she said. "Dale. He went out, but he'll come back. He always comes back." "Then we need to go now." "You don't understand. If he comes back and I'm gone, if he finds out I left with—" She stopped. Her eyes went to the patches on Deacon's jacket, the grave saint's insignia, the leather, the implications. "He'll kill me. He's said it before, but this time he means it. He bought a—" She stopped again, looked behind her into the dark interior of the trailer as if the walls themselves might be listening. "He bought a what?" Deacon asked. Sarah's hand tightened on the door until her knuckles whitened. "A gun, 3 weeks ago. Keeps it in the bedroom closet in a shoebox. He thinks I don't know." Gunnar and Deacon exchanged a look in the dark, the kind of look that recalibrates everything, the kind that takes a rescue operation and turns it into something with a much shorter clock and much higher stakes. "Ma'am?" Gunnar spoke for the first time, his voice so quiet it barely disturbed the air. "We need to leave this trailer in the next 5 minutes. Can you do that?" "I can't just—" 5 minutes. Anything you need. Anything you can carry. 5 minutes, and we're gone." Sarah looked at Gunnar, at his hands, steady, unlike hers, at his eyes, calm in the way that only people who've survived the unsurvivable can be calm. The stillness that exists on the other side of panic when you've been through it so many times, it becomes familiar terrain. She undid the chain. The inside of the trailer smelled like cigarettes and stale beer, and something else. Something Deacon recognized from deployments. The smell of fear. Not metaphorical, literal. The chemical signature of cortisol and adrenaline saturating an enclosed space over months and years until it seeped into the walls, the carpet, the very structure of the place. Sarah moved through the trailer with the efficiency of someone who'd rehearsed this. Not consciously. Unconsciously. The way abuse victims pack in their minds every single night, inventorying what they'd take and what they'd leave, running the escape drill in their imagination while lying next to the person they needed to escape from. She pulled a garbage bag from under the kitchen sink. Into it went a stack of documents from a drawer. Birth certificates, social security cards, the bureaucratic infrastructure of identity that you need to prove you exist in a country that otherwise doesn't care whether you do. Then clothes for Eli. Not hers, his first. Always his first. A photo album from a shelf. A stuffed animal so old and worn that its original species was unidentifiable, shoved deep into the bag with the specific urgency of someone protecting something that mattered more than anything rational. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. "That's it," she said. 1 garbage bag. An entire life compressed into 30 gallons of black plastic. They were crossing the yard toward the truck when headlights appeared on the road. Coming fast. Deacon's body responded before his brain finished processing the visual data. He grabbed Sarah by the arm. Gently, deliberately, gently, aware that any sudden grip from a man's hand would trigger a cascade of trauma responses, and moved her toward the passenger side of the truck. "Get in, now!" "That's him. That's his truck. I know the headlights. That's—" "Get in the truck, Sarah." She got in. Gunnar was already behind the wheel, engine turning over, transmission dropping into reverse with a clunk that echoed off the trailer's aluminum siding. The oncoming headlights were 200 yards away. 150. The vehicle was moving fast. Well, too fast for the icy road, too fast for the conditions. The speed of someone driving with intent rather than destination. Gunnar reversed the truck down the dirt driveway without looking, navigating by mirror and instinct and the particular spatial awareness that comes from years of operating vehicles in conditions where forward wasn't always an option. The tires hit the main road, and he cranked the wheel hard left, throwing the truck into a slide that caught the edge of a drainage ditch before the tread found purchase on asphalt. They were moving. South. Away from the trailer, away from the headlights. But in the rearview mirror, the oncoming vehicle slowed, stopped at the driveway, then reversed direction and began following. "He sees us," Sarah said. Her voice had gone flat. Not calm, empty. The voice of someone who'd predicted this exact outcome because, in her experience, escape attempts always ended the same way. Gunner accelerated. The truck's engine whined in protest as the speedometer climbed past 60 on a road designed for 40. Ice patches appeared in the headlights like landmines, patches of black glass that could send 2 tons of steel into a ditch or a tree or a telephone pole with zero notice. Deacon pulled out his phone and called Maddox. 1 ring. "Yeah? We have her. We're heading south on Route 9. The stepfather's following. He's got a gun in the trailer. She says he bought it 3 weeks ago." Silence on the other end. The kind of silence that happens when new information enters a calculation and changes every variable simultaneously. "How far behind you?" Deacon looked in the mirror. "Quarter mile. Closing." "Don't go to the garage. Don't bring him here. Take her to the diner. Park behind the building." "Copy." Deacon. "Yeah. Don't stop. Whatever he does, don't stop the truck." The call ended. Deacon looked at Sarah. She was sitting rigid in the center seat, garbage bag on her lap, eyes fixed on the windshield with the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd just crossed a threshold they could never uncross. "He's going to kill us," she said. Not panicked, factual, the way you might observe that it was going to rain. "No," Deacon said. "He's not. You don't know him. I don't need to know him. I know us." They reached the diner in 7 minutes. Gunner swung the truck behind the building and killed the headlights. The engine ticked in the cold. Steam rose from the hood like the truck itself was exhaling after holding its breath. 30 seconds later, the stepfather's truck blew past on the main road. Didn't slow. Didn't see them in the dark behind the building. Kept going south toward the highway like a bullet that had missed its target and didn't know it yet. But it would circle back. They all knew it. Men like Dale Whitmore didn't miss twice. They just recalculated and tried a different angle. Inside the diner, Darla had coffee ready. She didn't ask questions. She looked at Sarah, looked at the garbage bag, looked at the bruise blooming under the woman's left eye, and poured a cup without a word. Then she locked the front door, turned off the neon sign, and pulled the blinds. 20 minutes later, Maddox arrived with Eli. The boy walked through the diner door and saw his mother sitting in a booth with a coffee cup she hadn't touched and tears running silently down her face, and something detonated inside him. Not the explosion of someone breaking down, the implosion of someone who'd been holding themselves together with nothing but willpower and fear and the desperate, unsustainable belief that if he just stayed quiet enough and small enough and invisible enough, the damage would remain contained. "Mom." 1 word. 1 syllable. It came out of him like something that had been locked in a vault for years and had finally corroded through the door. Sarah opened her arms and Eli walked into them, and for 30 seconds the only sound in the diner was a mother crying into her son's hair and a boy making a noise that wasn't crying. It was deeper than crying, older than crying, the sound a human being makes when the thing they've been bracing against finally stops pushing and the relief is so enormous it registers as pain. Maddox watched from the counter. His jaw was set so tight the muscles in his temples visibly pulsed. Beside him, Reaper stood with his arms crossed and his eyes on the locked front door. "Webb's on his way," Bishop said from the corner booth, phone pressed to his ear. 45 minutes. He's drafting an emergency protective order in the car. 45 minutes is a long time, Reaper said. "It's what we've got." Maddox turned to Sarah. He waited until she looked up from Eli's head before he spoke. "Sarah, I need to ask you something." She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. The gesture was rough, almost angry. The way you wipe away tears when you're furious at yourself for having them. "The gun. The one Dale bought. Is it still in the closet?" "I don't know. He might have it with him." "What kind?" "I don't know guns. It's black. Small." "Handgun?" "Yes." Maddox looked at Reaper. That single look communicated a complete threat assessment. Armed male, emotionally volatile, aware that his control was being challenged, currently mobile and unaccounted for. The equation that every law enforcement manual and every combat manual and every survival manual identifies as the most dangerous configuration of variables possible. "We need to call the police," Sarah said suddenly. "I know I should have called before. I know. But I was—" "We know," Maddox said. "And yes, we're going to call them, but I need you to understand something first." He sat down across from her in the booth. Eli was pressed against her side, his broken arm cradled against his chest, his good hand gripping her sleeve with the ferocity of someone holding onto a life raft in open water. "The police are going to ask questions, a lot of them, and they're going to ask why you didn't call before, and they're going to look at us." He gestured at the leather-clad men filling the diner. "And they're going to make assumptions. Some of those assumptions will be wrong. Some of them will make this harder." "I don't care." "You need to care, because what happens in the next 12 hours determines whether Eli sleeps in a safe bed tomorrow night or gets cycled back into the same system that closed his file 3 times. Sarah flinched, not from a physical threat, from the words. From the knowledge that this stranger in a leather jacket knew about the files, knew about the closures, knew about the systematic, bureaucratic abandonment of her son by the institutions designed to protect him. "How do you know about—" "It doesn't matter how. What matters is this. Webb, our lawyer, is going to file an emergency order tonight. That gives us temporary protection. But temporary doesn't last. To make it permanent, you have to be willing to do something you've never done before." "What?" "Tell the truth, all of it, on the record, to a judge, with your name attached." Sarah's hand tightened around Eli's shoulder. The boy looked up at her with his one good eye, and the weight of that look, the weight of a child asking his mother to do the thing they'd both been too scared to do for years, was heavier than anything in the room. "He'll find us," she whispered. "Not if we do this right." "You can't guarantee that." "No, I can't. I told your son the truth the night I met him, and I'll tell you the same thing. I can't guarantee anything, but I can tell you that giving up is the only option that definitely ends badly. Everything else has a chance." Silence. The coffee machine hissed. Wind pressed against the windows. Somewhere outside, a Harley engine idled. Reaper's bike, parked at the front of the building. A 400-pound perimeter alarm system that would detect any approaching vehicle before it reached the parking lot. Sarah looked at her son, at his swollen eye, at his arm held at that wrong angle, at the split lip that had dried and cracked and would scar because nobody had cleaned it. "Okay," she said. One word. But it landed like a foundation stone. Maddox nodded, stood up, walked to the counter where Reaper was standing, and spoke low enough that only the road captain could hear. "I need you at the trailer." "What for?" "The gun. If it's still there, I want it gone before the cops show up. And if it's not there, then we have a bigger problem." Reaper left without another word. The sound of his Harley cranking to life outside vibrated through the diner's walls, a deep mechanical heartbeat that faded into the distance like a war drum retreating into darkness. It was Bishop who noticed the headlights first. He was sitting in the corner booth nearest the window, the one with the sight line to the parking lot and the road beyond. His hand stopped halfway to his coffee mug, froze in the air, and then slowly, very slowly, lowered to the table. "Maddox." One word, but the tone carried 30 years of experience reading situations that were about to go wrong. Maddox looked at the window. Through the gap in the blinds, a pair of headlights had appeared on the road, moving slowly, too slowly, the speed of someone looking for something rather than going somewhere. The vehicle stopped. A truck, parked on the shoulder 50 yards from the diner entrance, engine running, headlights on, nobody getting out. Just sitting there in the dark like a predator that had found the scent and was now deciding when to charge. Sarah saw it. Her entire body went rigid, a full system lockdown so instantaneous and so complete that Maddox understood she'd been living with this level of hypervigilance for so long it had become autonomous. She didn't need to think about being afraid. Her body did it for her. "That's him," she breathed. Eli pressed tighter against her side. His face went blank. Not calm, not scared, something beyond both. The expression of a child who'd been in this situation enough times to have developed his own protocol for it. a protocol that involved becoming as small and as quiet and as invisible as possible. Maddox moved to the window, looked through the blinds. The truck was a Ford F-150, dark blue, rust along the wheel wells. He could see the silhouette of a driver, but no details, just a shape, a presence. The mass and outline of a man sitting in a running vehicle at 10:30 at night outside a locked diner, deciding what to do next. "Nobody moves," Maddox said. "Nobody goes outside. Nobody escalates." "He's just going to sit there?" Deacon's voice was tight. "He's thinking. Men like him think in patterns. He's running scenarios. He knows they're here because the truck is here. He's deciding whether to come in or wait." "Wait for what?" "For them to come out." Gunner shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "What if he's got the gun?" The question landed in the room like a brick through glass. Everyone heard it. Nobody answered it, because the answer was the thing they were all thinking, but none of them wanted to say out loud. That a man with a gun and nothing left to lose is the most dangerous variable in any equation, and the only reliable way to neutralize that variable was something that would put every single one of them in prison for the rest of their lives. Minutes passed. 5. 10. The truck didn't move. The engine kept running. The headlights kept glowing. A standoff without contact, without communication, without anything except the raw, primitive tension of two forces occupying the same space and waiting for the other to make the first mistake. Then the driver's door opened. Dale Whitmore stepped out into the cold. He was bigger than Deacon had described, 6'2", thick through the shoulders, the build of a man who'd been physical his entire life and had weaponized that physicality against people who couldn't fight back. He wore a denim jacket over a flannel. Boots. No hat. His hands were at his sides. Both hands were visible. Both hands were empty. But that didn't mean anything, because the most dangerous thing about Dale Whitmore wasn't what he was carrying. It was what he was. He walked toward the diner. Not fast, not slow. The deliberate, measured pace of a man who wanted everyone watching to understand that he wasn't running and he wasn't scared and he owned every step he took because ownership was the only currency he understood. He stopped at the front door, tried the handle, locked. He knocked 3 times. Hard enough to rattle the frame. "Sarah." His voice was clear through the glass, calm, almost friendly. The voice of a man who'd learned that the scariest version of himself wasn't the loud one. It was the quiet one, the one that smiled, the one that spoke in reasonable tones while communicating unreasonable threats through nothing but eye contact and proximity. "I know you're in there, Sarah. I saw the truck." Nobody in the diner moved. "I'm not mad." A pause. A performance. "I just want to talk. You took off without saying anything, and I got worried. That's all." Sarah's hand was over her mouth. Not to stop a scream, to stop the sound of her breathing, because years of living with this man had taught her that even the sound of breathing could trigger him if the pitch was wrong or the timing was off. Eli sat perfectly still beside her, a statue made of bruised skin and survival instinct. "Come on, Sarah. It's cold out here. Let me in, and we'll talk about this like adults." Maddox walked to the door, stood on the other side of the glass, 3 feet from Dale Whitmore, with nothing between them but a pane of window and 20 years of damage that had been building toward this exact moment. He didn't unlock the door. He didn't speak through it. He just stood there and let Dale see him. Let him see the leather jacket, the scarred hands, the flat expression of a man who had no interest in talking and no fear of what came next. Dale's eyes locked onto Maddox's. The performance, the calm voice, the friendly concern, the "I just want to talk" routine, evaporated in real time. What replaced it was something raw and feral and honest in the way that only violence is honest. "Who the hell are you?" Dale said. Maddox said nothing. "I'm talking to you. That's my wife in there. That's my kid." Maddox said nothing. "You hear me? Open this goddamn door." Nothing, just eyes, just stillness. Just the specific, immovable presence of a man who had decided that the person on the other side of the glass was never going to touch that boy or that woman again, and who communicated that decision not through words or threats or posture, but through the absolute absence of any reaction at all. Because Maddox understood something about men like Dale that most people didn't. He understood that anger is a response to resistance, that aggression escalates when it meets opposition. But that confronting a man like Dale with silence, with the total, deafening void of zero engagement, was the one thing that genuinely terrified him. Because you can't fight nothing. You can't intimidate emptiness. You can't assert dominance over a man who refuses to acknowledge your existence. Dale stood on the other side of the glass for 90 seconds, his jaw working, his hands opening and closing at his sides, his breathing accelerating with the specific pattern of a man whose control system was encountering an input it couldn't process. Then he stepped back. One step, two. His eyes never left Maddox's. "This isn't over," he said. He turned and walked back to his truck with the same deliberate pace. Got in, closed the door, the engine revved. Not a departure sound, a statement. Then the truck pulled onto the road and drove north. Slowly, making sure everyone watched him leave, making sure they understood that leaving and surrendering were two different things. The diner exhaled. Sarah was crying, not sobbing, leaking, tears running down her face in steady, silent streams that she didn't bother wiping because she'd been crying for so many years. It had become a background process, something her body did automatically while the rest of her kept functioning. Maddox's phone rang. "Reaper." "Yeah. I'm at the trailer. The gun's gone." Maddox closed his eyes. 1 second, two. The weight of that information settled onto his shoulders like a physical load. Another 10 pounds of gravity added to a frame that was already carrying more than it was engineered to hold. "You're sure?" "Closet's empty. Shoebox is there. No gun. He's carrying. He was just here, at the diner. He didn't show it." "Doesn't mean he doesn't have it." "I know." "Maddox." Reaper's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. "I found something else." "What?" "In the bedroom, under the mattress. There's papers, court papers. Not the kind Webb would file. The other kind." "What other kind?" "Custody. He filed for full custody of Eli. 3 months ago, through a lawyer in Grand Junction. Sarah's name isn't on any of it. I don't think she knows." The room tilted. Not physically, perceptually. The way the world shifts when you realize the thing you thought you understood was actually a smaller part of a much larger thing that had been operating in the dark the entire time. Dale Whitmore wasn't just a drunk who hit his stepson. He was a man who was legally positioning himself to own the boy. "Why?" Maddox asked. The question was barely audible. "I don't know, but there's more. Financial documents, account numbers, transfers. Eli's father, his biological father. There's a trust. A real one. Set up before the father died. I can't read all of it, but the numbers are big enough to explain a lot." Maddox opened his eyes, looked across the diner at Eli, the bruised, broken, terrified 12-year-old sitting with his head against his mother's shoulder, holding himself together with nothing but tendons and stubbornness and the last shreds of whatever childhood he had left. And he understood. The beatings weren't rage. They weren't drunken loss of control. They weren't the random violence of a man who couldn't manage his temper. They were strategy. Dale Whitmore was breaking the boy on purpose, breaking him systematically, methodically, the way you break a horse, not to destroy it, but to control it, to make it compliant, to make it incapable of resistance, so that when the custody was finalized and the trust became accessible, the boy would be too damaged and too obedient to question what happened to the money. The abuse was an investment, and Eli was the asset. Maddox's hand found the edge of the counter and gripped it until his knuckles went white and his forearm trembled with the effort of holding himself in place. Because every cell in his body wanted to walk outside, get on his bike, find Dale Whitmore's truck on whatever road it was crawling along, and introduce the man to the kind of consequences that didn't require a judge or a filing or 45 minutes of wait time. But the boy was watching him. From across the room, with one eye swollen shut and one arm broken and a split lip that would scar, Eli Mercer was watching Maddox with an expression that contained the only question that mattered. "Are you going to become the same thing I'm running from?" Maddox exhaled, released the counter, let his hand fall to his side, and made a decision that was harder than any violence he'd ever committed or survived. He picked up his phone and dialed Webb. The lawyer answered on the second ring, out of breath, car engine humming in the background. Curtis, change of plans. This isn't just an emergency protective order anymore. What do you mean? I mean, this man isn't beating the kid because he's a drunk. He's beating the kid because the kid's worth money. There's a trust. And there's a custody filing she doesn't know about. 3 months old. Silence on the other end. The kind lawyers go quiet with when they realize the case they thought they were walking into has just become something exponentially larger and exponentially more dangerous. That changes everything, Webb said. I know. If he's filed for custody and there's a financial motive for the abuse, that's not just domestic violence. I know what it is. We need those documents, the custody filing, the trust paperwork, the financial records. Without them, Reaper has them. He's at the trailer now. He can't take them. If he removes documents from the home, defense counsel will argue illegal seizure. Everything becomes inadmissible. Then what do we do? Photograph them, every page. Then put them back exactly where he found them. We use the photographs to build our filing and then subpoena the originals through proper channels. Maddox relayed the instructions to Reaper. The road captain's response was a single word, copy, followed by the sound of a phone camera clicking in the darkness of a trailer bedroom while a blizzard built strength outside. Webb arrived at the diner at 11:42 p.m. He came through the back door carrying a briefcase and a legal pad, and the particular exhaustion of a man who'd been disbarred once and lived every day since then like he was trying to earn back something he'd never fully lost. He sat down across from Sarah, looked at her face, looked at Eli's arm, then opened his briefcase and took out a pen. I'm going to ask you questions, he said. Some of them will be hard. Some of them will feel impossible. But every word you say tonight is a brick in the wall between your son and that man. So I need you to build me a wall, Sarah. The biggest wall you've ever built. Sarah looked at Eli. The boy looked back at her. And in the space between their eyes, a conversation happened that required no words. The silent negotiation between a mother and her child about whether the truth was finally worth the cost of telling it. Eli nodded, one small, almost imperceptible dip of his chin. Sarah turned to Webb, took a breath that seemed to draw air from somewhere deeper than her lungs, and started talking. Outside, the Colorado blizzard arrived in full force, burying Black Hollow under a weight of white silence, while somewhere on a frozen road, a man with a gun and a custody filing and a financial motive for destroying a 12-year-old boy sat in a running truck, staring through the windshield at a world that was finally, after years of perfect control, slipping out of his hands. And in his chest, where rational calculation usually lived, something new was taking root. Not fear, rage, the kind that doesn't negotiate, the kind that doesn't retreat, the kind that drives a man to decide that if he can't own what he wants, nobody else will either. Dale Whitmore put the truck in gear and turned around. Reaper saw the headlights first. He was standing in the doorway of the trailer, phone in one hand, the last photograph still loading on his screen. Page 7 of the custody filing, the one with Dale Whitmore's signature at the bottom in handwriting so controlled it looked like it belonged to a different person than the man who put his fist through a 12-year-old's face. When the beams appeared at the end of the dirt road, 2 yellow eyes cutting through the blizzard, moving with the slow, deliberate pace of something that had already decided what it was going to do and was simply closing the distance. Reaper didn't run. Men who'd survived what Reaper survived didn't run. They assessed, calculated, made decisions in the space between heartbeats that civilian brains took minutes to process. He stepped back inside the trailer, slid the custody documents under the mattress in the exact position he'd found them. Left edge aligned with the seam in the mattress cover, top page slightly offset from the stack beneath it, the specific arrangement of papers that only a man who'd handled them repeatedly would maintain. He positioned the mattress back down, smoothed the bedsheet. Then he walked to the back of the trailer and climbed out through the bathroom window. The frame was narrow. Reaper was not. His shoulder scraped both sides and his jacket caught on a nail that tore a 3-inch gash in the leather as he squeezed through, landing in the frozen mud behind the trailer with a sound that disappeared into the howling wind. His bike was parked 200 yards east, behind a storage shed on the adjacent property. He'd positioned it there on approach. Standard operating procedure, always leave yourself an exit that doesn't share geography with your entrance. He moved through the dark on foot, keeping the trailer's bulk between himself and the approaching headlights, his boots crunching through snow that was accumulating fast enough to erase tracks within minutes. He was 60 yards from his bike when he heard the truck door slam, then the trailer door being kicked open, then silence. The specific loaded silence of a man walking through his own home and realizing someone else had been inside it. The silence of a predator finding unfamiliar scent in its den. Reaper reached his Harley, threw his leg over the seat, and turned the key without starting the engine. Not yet. The V-twin would announce his position to anyone within a quarter mile, and right now the blizzard was his ally. White noise masking his presence, snow covering his footprints, darkness swallowing his silhouette. He waited. Inside the trailer, a light came on in the bedroom. Through the plastic-sheeted window, Reaper saw the shadow of a man standing at the bed, lifting the mattress, checking. The shadow went still, then it moved, fast, purposeful, toward the closet. The bedroom light flickered as the shadow tore through shelves and drawers with the frantic energy of someone looking for something that should be there and wasn't. The gun. The gun Reaper had already confirmed was missing. The gun that was somewhere else now, on Dale Whitmore's body, in his truck, in the space between his waistband and his skin where men who've made a decision carry the tools of that decision. Reaper's phone vibrated. Maddox. He answered without speaking, just held the phone to his ear and listened. "Where are you?" Maddox's voice was tight, controlled, the voice of a man running on something harder than adrenaline. "Behind the trailer." "He's inside. He checked the papers." "Does he know they were moved?" "I put them back exactly." Exactly isn't always enough. Reaper watched the shadow in the bedroom window stop moving, stand still. The particular stillness of someone thinking, recalculating, arriving at conclusions. "He's figured something out," Reaper said. "I don't know what, but something just changed in there." "Get out, now. Get back here." "Where's here?" "The diner?" "No. We moved. The apartment above the garage. Sarah and Eli are upstairs. Bishop's with them. Deacon and Gunner are on the floor." "Why'd you move?" "Because the diner has glass windows on 3 sides and a man with a gun doesn't need a door." Reaper cranked the Harley. The engine exploded to life in the silence. A detonation of mechanical fury that shattered the white noise of the blizzard and announced his presence to everything within earshot, including the man inside the trailer. He didn't care. The bike's rear tire bit into frozen gravel and threw a rooster tail of ice and mud as Reaper accelerated onto the road. In his mirror, the trailer door flew open. Dale Whitmore stood in the frame, backlit by the bedroom light, watching the single red taillight disappear into the storm. Now he knew. Now he knew someone had been in his home, had touched his things, had seen the papers and the empty shoebox and the architecture of a plan that was never supposed to be visible to anyone. Reaper rode through the blizzard at 70 miles per hour, with visibility measured in feet, navigating by memory and the instinct of a man who'd ridden these roads in every condition the Colorado sky could manufacture. The cold hit his face like broken glass. His hands went numb on the grips within 2 minutes. Ice formed on his beard, his eyelashes, the exposed skin above his collar, where the wind found gaps in his armor. He reached the garage in 11 minutes, killed the engine, walked inside. Maddox was standing in the center of the floor next to a workbench covered in tools and the disassembled remnants of the Harley Softail he and Eli had been rebuilding. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow-green wash that made the men's faces look like something carved from stone and shadow. "He knows," Reaper said. "How much?" "Enough." He checked the closet. The gun's definitely on him, and the papers. I put them back clean, but he stood there too long. He was reading the room. He knows someone was there. Maddox absorbed this the way he absorbed everything. Silently, internally, the information processed and cataloged and integrated into the decision matrix that had been running in his head since the night Eli first walked into the diner. He didn't react, didn't curse, didn't pace, just stood there with his hands at his sides and his eyes focused on something that existed several moves ahead of the present moment. Webb filed the emergency order, Maddox said. Judge signed it 20 minutes ago. That means legally, right now, Dale Whitmore is prohibited from coming within 500 feet of Sarah or Eli. Legally, Reaper repeated. The word carried the specific weight of a man who'd learned through hard experience that legality and reality operated on different timelines. Sheriff's office has a copy. They're supposed to serve it tonight. In this blizzard? In this blizzard. Reaper looked at the ceiling. Above them, through the thin floor of the apartment, he could hear footsteps. Small ones. Eli, probably. Pacing. The restless movement of a child who'd been hunted so long that stillness felt like surrender. How many deputies does this town have? Reaper asked. 3? How many on duty tonight? 1? Maybe 2? And the nearest state police? Pueblo. 45 minutes in good weather. In this? Maddox looked toward the garage door beyond which the blizzard was building into something biblical. Could be 2 hours. Could be never. So it's us. It's us. The sentence hung in the air between them like a bridge between two cliffs. The only way across, and neither of them certain it would hold. Deacon appeared from the back room carrying 2 cups of coffee from the machine Darla had donated from the diner, along with a box of supplies that included blankets, canned soup, and a first aid kit held together with duct tape. He handed 1 cup to Maddox, 1 to Reaper, and stood there with his arms crossed and his jaw set. Gunner's watching the road from the east window upstairs, Deacon said. Clear so far, but visibility's down to maybe 50 feet. Which means we won't see him until he's already here, Maddox said. If he comes. He's coming. Nobody argued, because they all understood the mathematics of a man like Dale Whitmore, the calculus of control and ownership, and the specific, predictable escalation pattern of an abuser who realizes his grip is slipping. These men had seen it before, in combat zones, in domestic situations, in the rearview mirrors of lives they'd been running from for decades. The pattern was always the same. When control fails, force follows. When force fails, destruction follows. And when a man decides that the thing he can't control would be better destroyed than free, he becomes something that paperwork and legal orders and 500-foot perimeters cannot stop. Only other men can stop that. Men who've decided that standing between the destruction and its target is worth whatever it costs. Maddox climbed the stairs to the apartment. The space was small, 2 rooms above the garage, originally built as a caretaker's quarters when the property was a working ranch. A kitchenette with a hot plate. A bathroom with a shower that produced water in 2 temperatures, cold and colder. A main room with a couch, a folding table, and a mattress on the floor that Bishop had dragged out of storage and covered with the cleanest blankets he could find. Sarah sat on the couch with a legal pad in her lap, Webb's legal pad, the one she'd been writing on for the past 2 hours, filling page after page with dates and incidents and the detailed chronology of a nightmare that had been running on repeat for 4 years. Her handwriting was small and precise, the penmanship of someone who understood that every word she put on paper was simultaneously an act of courage and a target painted on her back. Eli sat beside her with his broken arm wrapped in a makeshift splint that Bishop had constructed from a piece of wooden dowel and strips of torn bedsheet. The old man had field medic experience from a war he never talked about, and the splint was clean and secure, but the boy needed a hospital, and they all knew it. "How's the arm?" Maddox asked. Eli looked up. His good eye was bloodshot from exhaustion. "Hurts. Scale of 1 to 10. 7. That means it's a 9. The ghost of something that might have been a smile in a different life flickered across Eli's face. "Maybe 8. We're going to get you to a hospital. Not tonight. The roads are shut. But first thing tomorrow." "I've had worse." That sentence, delivered by a 12-year-old with the casual familiarity of someone discussing weather, hit Maddox in the chest like a round from a .45. He kept his expression level because the boy was watching, and because falling apart in front of someone who needed you to be solid was a luxury he couldn't afford. "I know you have," Maddox said. "That's going to stop." Sarah looked up from the legal pad. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen, but something had changed in them since the diner, something structural. The collapse of the old architecture, the fear, the paralysis, the learned helplessness of years spent surviving instead of living, and the first fragile scaffolding of something new being erected in its place. "Webb says the hearing is Monday," she said. "Emergency custody. He thinks we have enough." "We do." He also said Dale will have a lawyer, a real one, the one from Grand Junction who filed the custody papers. "Webb can handle it." "Can he?" Sarah's voice carried the specific doubt of someone who'd watched institutions fail her son 3 times and had earned the right to question whether the 4th attempt would be different. "Dale's lawyer has money behind him. Webb is doing this for free because he owes you. That's not the same thing." She was right. Maddox knew she was right. Webb was competent but damaged. The disbarment in Nevada, the drinking, the career trajectory of a man who'd started high and slid sideways until he landed in a town small enough that his reputation couldn't find him. Against a well-funded attorney from Grand Junction with a custody filing already in the system, Webb was a Harley with a fouled carburetor going against a machine that had been tuned for exactly this kind of fight. "We'll make it enough," Maddox said, because that was all he had. Not certainty, not guarantees, just the stubborn, bone-deep refusal to accept that the outcome was predetermined. His phone buzzed. Gunner, from the east window. "Headlights on Route 9. Moving slow. Coming this direction." Maddox walked to the window and looked out into the blizzard. The world outside was white violence, snow driven horizontal by wind that screamed through the gaps in the building's siding like something in pain. Visibility was a wall of white. Nothing beyond 20 feet was real, but through the chaos, 2 points of light appeared on the road. Dim, distant, moving with the patient, inexorable pace of something that had nowhere else to be and nothing left to lose. "Could be anyone," Bishop said from the corner, but his voice said he didn't believe it. "Could be," Maddox agreed, and his voice said the same. The headlights stopped. 300 yards from the garage, just outside the range where details became visible. A truck-shaped shadow behind the glowing eyes of its headlamps, sitting on the road in the middle of a blizzard at 1:15 in the morning. Watching. Maddox turned to Sarah. "Take Eli into the bathroom. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone except me or Bishop. If you hear anything that doesn't sound right, you call 911 and you don't stop calling until someone answers." Sarah stood up, took Eli's good hand. The boy resisted for half a second. The instinct of someone who'd been protecting his mother longer than his mother had been protecting him. The reluctance to leave the room where the men he'd come to trust were preparing for something he could feel in the change of air pressure. "Go with your mom," Maddox said. Quiet. Not a command. A request from one survivor to another. Eli looked at him. That look lasted 3 seconds, but contained a conversation that would have taken most people an hour. A conversation about trust and fear, and the difference between being abandoned and being protected. About whether the men in this room were going to be there when the door opened again, or whether this was another version of the same disappearing act the world had been performing on him since he was old enough to remember. "I'll be right here," Maddox said. "I'm not going anywhere." Eli nodded. Once. Then he let his mother lead him into the bathroom. The lock clicked. The sound was small and metallic and final. Maddox descended the stairs. The 5 remaining saints were already positioned, not by assignment but by instinct, the tactical distribution of experienced men who understood geometry and threat vectors, and the physics of a building that had 3 entry points and not enough bodies to cover all of them simultaneously. Reaper at the front, Deacon at the side door, Gunner at the east window, Bishop at the foot of the stairs, the last line between the apartment and whatever came through the building's perimeter. Maddox in the center, where he could move to any position in 3 seconds or less. No guns. The Saints didn't carry inside town limits. Club rule. A rule that felt like wisdom on normal nights and felt like a death sentence tonight. Tools, though. The garage was full of tools. Tire irons, socket wrenches, pry bars. The implements of mechanical work that could, in desperate hands, become implements of something else entirely. Nobody picked anything up. Not yet. Because picking up a weapon was a decision, and that decision meant accepting a future that couldn't be walked back. Minutes passed. The headlights on the road didn't move. The blizzard screamed. The garage lights hummed their dying insect hum, and the silence inside the building was the kind that lives in foxholes and bunkers and the moments before impact. The silence of men who've stopped talking because talking wastes energy, and energy might be the only thing that keeps them alive. Then the headlights went dark. Gunner saw it first. Lights out. He killed them, which meant he was moving. On foot. In the blizzard. Using the storm as cover the same way Reaper had used it an hour ago. The same tactical thinking, the same predatory logic, the same understanding that darkness and weather were tools if you were willing to trade comfort for advantage. Nobody can see in this, Deacon said. Not even him. He doesn't need to see, Maddox said. He knows where we are. He can follow the building's lights. Maddox hit the switch. The garage went dark. The only light left was the faint glow from the apartment upstairs, leaking through the floorboards in thin gold lines that striped the concrete floor like bars of a cage. Gunner, kill the upstairs lights. Footsteps on the stairs. A click. The gold lines disappeared. Total darkness now, except for the faint blue-white glow of the blizzard pressing against the windows. The luminescence of a million snowflakes reflecting whatever ambient light the clouds held. Eyes adjusted. Shapes emerged from the blackness. The silhouettes of motorcycles. Workbenches. Tool racks. The outlines of men standing in positions they'd chosen with the precision of chess pieces arranged by a player who understood that this game had no second round. Maddox's phone vibrated. Unknown number. He answered. I know what you did. Dale Whitmore's voice came through the speaker like something scraped from the bottom of a frozen river. Calm. Quiet. The dangerous quiet. You broke into my home. You touched my things. You took my family. Maddox said nothing. I have rights. Legal rights. I filed papers. I have a lawyer. I have standing. You're a bunch of criminals in a garage playing hero, and when this is over, every single one of you is going to prison. Maddox said nothing. You hearing me? I want my wife and my kid right now. You bring them out, or I swear I'll... He's not your kid. Maddox's voice cut through the phone line like a blade through bandage. 3 words. Quiet. Absolute. The first thing he'd said to Dale Whitmore directly, and the precision of it was surgical. Not an insult, not a threat, just a fact delivered with the specific temperature of 0 degrees. Silence on the other end. The kind of silence that happens when a man's narrative, the story he tells himself about who he is and what he owns and what he's entitled to, collides with a wall it can't talk its way through. You don't know anything about my family, Dale said. But the calm was cracking now. Hairline fractures spreading through the performance like ice breaking under weight. I know about the trust, Maddox said. I know about the custody filing. I know about the money. The silence that followed was different. Not angry silence, not calculating silence. The silence of a man who's just realized that the ground he's standing on has been mined, and every step he's taken tonight has brought him closer to the detonation. You don't have proof of anything. Judges decide what counts as proof, not you. No judge in this county is going to take the word of a motorcycle gang over Monday morning, 9 a.m., courtroom B. I guess we'll find out. The call ended. Not because Dale hung up, because Maddox did. He pressed the button and slid the phone into his pocket and stood in the darkness of the garage listening to the sound of his own heartbeat. And the wind, and the absolute silence of 5 men who understood that the conversation they'd just heard had changed the architecture of the threat. Dale Whitmore wasn't going to wait until Monday. Whatever he was planning to do, he was planning to do it before the courthouse opened, before the judge saw the evidence, before the legal system, the same system that had failed Eli 3 times, had a chance to finally get it right. They had 60 hours. 60 hours to keep a woman and a boy alive in a garage in a blizzard with a man and a gun somewhere in the dark outside. We need the sheriff, Bishop said from the stairs. I called. 20 minutes ago, Maddox replied. Dispatch said the deputy on duty is handling a jackknifed semi on the highway. Second deputy lives in Alamosa, 40 miles. National Guard? It's a domestic situation, Bishop, not a natural disaster. Nobody's sending the guard. Then we call the state police ourselves. Tell them there's a man with a gun threatening. Tell them what? That a motorcycle club stole a man's wife and kid from his home, broke into his trailer, photographed his private documents, and now wants police protection? How does that sound to you? Bishop's jaw tightened, because he knew how it sounded. It sounded like exactly the kind of story that would make a state trooper side with the man in the truck instead of the men in leather. We're on our own, Maddox said. Not with resignation, with acceptance. The specific, battle-hardened acceptance of a man who'd spent his entire adult life in situations where institutional support was either 45 minutes away or fundamentally uninterested in arriving. The garage door rattled, not from wind. Wind produces a sustained, wavering pressure. This was a single, sharp impact, the kind made by a hand or a boot, or a shoulder testing the strength of a barrier. Every man in the room went still. Another rattle. Harder. From the left side of the rolling door where the track met the frame and the lock was a padlock on a hasp that had been installed 20 years ago and maintained never. Then nothing. 30 seconds of nothing. Then footsteps. Outside. Moving along the east wall. Slow. Deliberate. The crunch of boots on frozen ground, audible even through the building's walls because the silence inside was so complete that the men's own breathing sounded like wind. The footsteps stopped at the side door. The one Deacon was standing beside, his back flat against the wall, a tire iron in his right hand that he didn't remember picking up. The door handle turned. Slowly. Testing. Locked. A pause. The handle released. The footsteps resumed, continuing along the east wall toward the back of the building, toward the narrow gap between the garage and the fence line that led to the rear entrance. Maddox moved through the darkness with the silence of someone who'd spent years learning to exist without sound. He reached the back door in 4 seconds, stood to the left of the frame, waited. The footsteps arrived on the other side. The handle turned. This door wasn't locked. The rear entrance had a latch, not a deadbolt. A simple hook-and-eye closure that would hold against wind but not against intent. The latch lifted. Metal scraped against metal. The door opened 1 inch. 2. Cold air poured through the gap like water through a crack in a dam, carrying snowflakes and the smell of exhaust and the particular ozone charge of a night that was about to break. Maddox put his hand flat against the door and held it. 1 inch of wooden door between his palm and the hand on the other side. He could feel the pressure, the pushing, the weight of a man leaning against the door with the patient, testing force of someone determining how much resistance stood between him and what he wanted. Dale. Maddox's voice was barely above a whisper, spoken directly into the 1 inch gap, close enough that the man on the other side would feel the breath behind the words. There's a court order. You come through this door and everything you've built, the custody filing, the lawyer, the legal case, all of it dies. Right here. Right now. You'll have nothing. Silence from the other side, but the pressure didn't stop. The door trembled against Maddox's palm with the vibration of 2 opposing forces meeting at a boundary neither was willing to concede. I want to see my wife. Dale's voice came through the gap, close, so close Maddox could smell bourbon and cigarettes and the sour, chemical tang of a man whose body was running on cortisol in rage. That's my right. Not anymore. A piece of paper doesn't change what's mine. She was never yours. The pressure on the door increased. Maddox braced. His boots slid a 1/4 inch on the concrete floor, the grip of rubber on dust-covered cement losing traction against the weight being applied from the outside. Reaper, Maddox said. Not loud, just enough. Reaper materialized from the darkness and placed his hand on the door beside Maddox's. 2 men, 440 pounds of combined mass. The door stopped moving. Last chance, Dale. Maddox's voice was steady, but something underneath it had changed. A tectonic shift from restraint to resolution, from patience to the specific quiet finality of a man who's reached the end of every alternative and is standing at the edge of the only option left. Walk away. Get in your truck. Drive to wherever you're staying. Show up in court on Monday with your lawyer and your suit and your paperwork and fight this the way it's supposed to be fought. That's your one move, your only move. The pressure held for 3 more seconds. The door vibrated between them like a living membrane separating two worlds that couldn't coexist. Then the pressure released. Footsteps. Retreating. Slow at first, then faster. The crunch of boots on snow accelerating from walk to jog to something that wasn't quite running but carried the same desperate energy. A truck door slammed in the distance. An engine turned over. Headlights flared through the blizzard, two bright eyes opening in the white darkness. The truck didn't leave. It moved. Forward. Toward the garage. Slowly at first, then accelerating, the engine note climbing from idle to growl to roar as the vehicle gained speed on the frozen road. "He's coming at the building," Gunner said from the window. His voice was flat, reportorial, the voice of a man narrating his own potential death with the detachment of someone who'd made peace with that possibility years ago. Maddox calculated. The garage door was a rolling steel panel rated for wind loads, but not for vehicular impact. A Ford F-150 at 30 miles per hour would punch through it like paper. The truck would enter the garage at speed, carrying 3,000 pounds of momentum into a space filled with motorcycles and tools and men. "Upstairs," Maddox said. "Everyone, now." They moved. All of them. Not running. There's a difference between running and tactical withdrawal, and these men understood that difference in their bones. Reaper first, clearing the stairs in 4 strides. Deacon behind him. Gunner, Bishop. Maddox was last. He was on the 3rd step when the truck hit. The sound was apocalyptic. Steel meeting steel in a collision that turned the garage door into shrapnel. Panels tearing free from tracks. Rivets popping like gunshots. The entire front wall of the building buckling inward as 3,000 pounds of Ford F-150 plowed through it at 35 miles per hour and buried itself in the workbench where Eli had learned to gap spark plugs. The impact shook the building from foundation to roofline. The stairs shuddered under Maddox's feet. Tools flew off pegboards. Motorcycles toppled like dominoes. 700 pounds of chrome and steel crashing onto concrete in a chain reaction of destruction that filled the garage with the sound of everything breaking at once. Then silence. Then the truck's engine, still running, idling in the wreckage. Headlights illuminating a landscape of devastation. Bent metal, shattered glass, oil and gasoline pooling on the concrete in dark spreading lakes that caught the light and threw it back in rainbow fragments. Then a truck door opening. Then boots on concrete. Then a voice. "Sarah!" Not a shout. A command. The voice of a man who had exhausted every other option and arrived at the only one that remained. The option that existed past the end of reason, past the end of law, past the end of everything except the primal annihilating need to control or destroy. Maddox reached the top of the stairs. The apartment was dark. Reaper stood at the window looking down into the ruined garage. Deacon was at the bathroom door where Sarah and Eli were locked inside, his body positioned between the door and whatever came up those stairs. Through the floor, they could hear him, moving through the wreckage, kicking aside debris, boots crunching on broken glass. "I know you're up there. I can see the stairs." Maddox looked at Reaper. Their eyes met in the dark. 2 men who'd faced worse and survived, but never with a child behind them. Never with stakes that couldn't be measured in their own blood. "He's got the gun," Maddox whispered. "I know. If he comes up those stairs, I know. Then you know what we have to do." Reaper nodded once. Then he reached down and picked up the only object within reach. A fire extinguisher mounted to the wall beside the window. 10 pounds of pressurized metal. Not a weapon. A tool. The same way everything in this building was a tool. Designed for one purpose, repurposed by desperation into something else entirely. Below them, the footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. And stopped. And in the bathroom behind them, through the locked door, Maddox heard something that hit him harder than any truck, any fist, any weapon he'd ever faced. Eli's voice, whispering to his mother, "It's okay, Mom. It's okay. He won't get up here." A 12-year-old boy with a broken arm and a swollen eye and a lifetime of damage, comforting his mother in the dark, still protecting, still absorbing, still placing his own body between the people he loved and the thing that was trying to destroy them. Maddox's hand stopped shaking. His breathing slowed. Every fragmented, competing impulse inside him, the rage, the fear, the soldier, the enforcer, the broken child he'd once been, collapsed into a single, crystalline point of absolute clarity. He turned and faced the stairs, and the first boot appeared on the bottom step. The boot was heavy. Work boot. Steel toe. The kind that leaves marks on skin and wood and everything it touches. It landed on the first step with a sound that traveled through the staircase and into the bones of every man standing at the top. Maddox didn't wait for the second step. He went down, not charging, descending. The way you walk towards something you've already decided to face. Controlled, measured. Each step deliberate, each footfall placed with the precision of a man who understood that the next 60 seconds would determine whether a 12-year-old boy woke up tomorrow in a safe bed or didn't wake up at all. The staircase was narrow, room for one body at a time. That was the advantage. Whatever Dale Whitmore was carrying, gun, knife, fists, the blunt instrument of his own mass, the staircase was an equalizer. One man up, one man down, and the laws of physics didn't care which one had the weapon. They met on the fourth step. Dale looked up. Maddox looked down. 3 feet of vertical separation and a lifetime of damage compressed into the space between them. Dale's right hand was at his side. In it, visible now, catching the faint light from the truck's headlamps bleeding through the ruined garage below, was the gun. Small, black, a .38 snub-nose revolver, the kind you buy at a pawn shop with cash and no questions. His hand was shaking, not from fear, from the chemical overload of a man running on bourbon and adrenaline and the catastrophic realization that his entire architecture of control was collapsing in real time. "Move," Dale said. Maddox didn't move. "I said move." "No." The word filled the staircase like concrete filling a mold. Dense, permanent, the kind of no that doesn't negotiate or qualify or leave room for reinterpretation. Dale raised the gun. The barrel found Maddox's chest, center mass, the place where a bullet does the most efficient damage. At this distance, 3 feet, even a shaking hand couldn't miss. "I will shoot you." "Maybe." "Don't test me." "I'm not testing you, Dale. I'm telling you what's going to happen. You shoot me, I fall. Reaper's behind me. You shoot Reaper, Deacon's behind him. You shoot Deacon, there's still 2 more. And you've got 5 rounds in that cylinder, maybe 6. And somewhere in the math between your bullets and our bodies, you run out before we do." Dale's jaw worked. The muscles in his face contracted and released in rapid cycles. The visible manifestation of a mind trying to process a scenario it hadn't anticipated. He'd expected the gun to end this, expected the sight of it to clear the stairs the way it cleared every room in his trailer, the way it cleared every argument, the way it cleared the space around him and made the world retreat to a distance he could manage. But the man on the stairs wasn't retreating, and that was the variable Dale Whitmore had never accounted for. The existence of someone willing to absorb the bullet for the person behind them. "Even if you get past all of us," Maddox continued, his voice so steady it sounded mechanical, "there's a locked door at the top. And behind that door is a woman who just spent 2 hours writing down every single thing you've done for the past 4 years. Dates, times, injuries, hospital visits, the trust fund, the custody filing she didn't know about. All of it. On paper. With a lawyer's signature. That document is already uploaded, Dale. It's in a system you can't reach. Shooting everyone in this building doesn't erase it. Nothing erases it. It's done." Something changed in Dale's eyes. The rage didn't diminish. It reorganized, shifted from the hot, explosive fury of a man attacking to the cold, collapsing implosion of a man realizing he'd lost. Not in the future. Not on Monday in front of a judge. Right now. Standing on a staircase in a ruined garage with a gun that could destroy but couldn't recover anything. His hand was shaking harder now. The barrel wavered. Small oscillations that traced circles on Maddox's chest like a pen trying to find the right place to sign. "She's my wife," Dale said, but the word came out fractured, cracked down the middle like something that had been held together by force and was finally splitting under its own weight. "No," Maddox said. "She's a woman who just chose to stop being afraid of you. There's a difference." Dale Whitmore stared at Maddox Creed for 7 seconds. 7 seconds during which the entire trajectory of 6 lives, Eli's, Sarah's, Maddox's, and the future that would exist or not exist depending on what happened next, balanced on the trembling edge of a trigger pull. Then his arm lowered. Not slowly, not dramatically. It dropped. The sudden, graceless collapse of a limb whose owner had run out of the specific kind of energy required to hold a weapon against another human being. The gun hung at his side, pointing at the step beneath his feet, and the man who held it seemed to shrink inside his own body, as if the rage had been the only thing maintaining his architecture, and without it, there was nothing left to hold the structure upright. Maddox moved, fast, faster than his size should have allowed. His left hand closed around the revolver cylinder, locking it, preventing the hammer from falling even if Dale's finger spasmed on the trigger. His right hand found Dale's wrist and twisted, not violently, not with the bone-breaking force he was capable of, but with the firm mechanical precision of a man who'd disarmed people before and understood that the goal was separation, not punishment. The gun came free. Dale's hand opened like a flower dying and fast forward, fingers spreading as the metal left his grip. Maddox passed the revolver behind him without looking. Reaper took it, dropped the cylinder, emptied 5 rounds into his palm, closed his fist around them. The sound of brass clinking against brass was the sound of something ending. Dale Whitmore stood on the 4th step of a staircase in a demolished garage, disarmed, deflated, the entire infrastructure of his power, physical, legal, psychological, dismantled in stages over the course of a single night by men he'd dismissed as criminals. His eyes were wet. Not from sadness, from the specific annihilating humiliation of a man who'd built his identity on control and was now standing in the wreckage of everything he'd controlled. "Sit down," Maddox said. Dale sat, right there on the step. His legs folded and he lowered himself onto the wood like a man twice his age, like a man whose body had suddenly decided to stop cooperating with the demands being placed on it. Maddox descended to the step above him, sat down. 2 men on a staircase in the dark, the smell of gasoline and motor oil rising from the destroyed garage below, the blizzard still screaming outside through the hole where the garage door used to be. "It's over," Maddox said. Not gloating, not triumphant. The flat, exhausted statement of a man who wanted this to be finished as badly as the man sitting below him. Dale didn't respond. He put his head in his hands and stayed there. Maddox looked up the stairs. Reaper stood at the top, silhouetted against the faint gray light leaking through the apartment window. Behind him, the bathroom door was still closed, still locked, still protecting. "Call the sheriff again," Maddox said. Reaper nodded, disappeared into the apartment. 19 minutes later, a single patrol car crawled through the blizzard and parked in front of the garage. Deputy Aaron Cole, 26 years old, 2 years on the job, visibly overwhelmed by the scene in front of him, stepped out into the snow and stared at the Ford F-150 embedded in the garage wall with the expression of a man whose training had not prepared him for this specific configuration of reality. Maddox met him outside, explained, kept it clinical. Domestic violence. Emergency protective order already filed. Armed suspect entered the premises with a firearm. Vehicle used to breach the structure. Victims inside, including a minor with injuries requiring medical attention. Deputy Cole looked at Maddox's leather cut, at the grave saints patches, at the scarred knuckles and the road-worn face and all the visual markers that his training had categorized as threat indicators. "You said the victims are they're under our protection. Sir, are you a family member?" "I'm the reason they're alive right now. Does that count?" Cole held Maddox's gaze for a long moment. Then he walked inside. Found Dale Whitmore still sitting on the stairs, head in hands, the specific posture of a man who had surrendered everything and was now just waiting for the mechanism of consequences to complete its work. The arrest was quiet. No struggle. No resistance. Dale stood when told to stand, turned when told to turn, placed his hands behind his back when told to place them. The handcuffs clicked with a sound that was too small for what it represented. The final severing of a man's access to the people he'd been destroying. Cole walked Dale to the patrol car, opened the back door. Dale ducked inside. The door closed. And through the snow-streaked window, Maddox saw Dale Whitmore's face one last time. Not angry, not defiant. Empty. The face of a man staring at the smoldering crater where his life used to be, unable to comprehend how the architecture of power he'd spent years constructing had been demolished in a single night by men who fixed motorcycles and a boy who'd been brave enough to stand by a jukebox and ask if anyone would notice if he disappeared. The patrol car pulled away. Its lights painted red and blue streaks across the snow that faded into the blizzard like bruises healing in fast forward. Maddox stood in the wreckage of the garage and breathed. Just breathed. For 30 seconds, he did nothing but stand there and pull cold air into his lungs and release it in clouds of steam that dissolved into the night. The adrenaline was draining from his system in real time, leaving behind the shaky, hollow, bone-deep exhaustion that follows sustained crisis. The particular weariness of a body that has been running on emergency fuel for hours and has finally been told it can stop. His hands started shaking, both of them. A tremor that began in his fingers and climbed through his wrists and into his forearms with the slow spreading pattern of something that had been held back by willpower alone and was now being released. He let them shake. There was nobody left to be strong for in this moment. Just him and the snow and the ruined garage and the distant sound of a patrol car disappearing into the white. Then a voice behind him. "Maddox!" He turned. Bishop stood in the doorway of what remained of the garage entrance, snow dusting his white beard, his eyes carrying the particular weight of a man who had seen too much in too many decades and had somehow maintained the capacity to feel all of it. "The boy wants to see you." Maddox climbed the stairs for the last time that night. Each step felt heavier than the last, not from injury, not from fatigue, but from the specific gravity of returning to normal after surviving something abnormal. The weight of transition, the work of downshifting from combat to peace, which every veteran knows is harder than the fighting itself. The bathroom door was open. Sarah stood in the kitchenette, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in low tones to someone. Webb, probably, or a dispatcher, or one of the many institutional voices that would populate her life for the next weeks and months, as the machinery of legal protection slowly, inadequately, belatedly did what it should have done years ago. Eli sat on the couch. His broken arm rested on a pillow someone had placed on his lap. His good eye, the one that wasn't swollen shut, tracked Maddox across the room with the focus of a child who was recalculating everything he thought he knew about the world. Maddox sat down on the folding chair across from him. The chair creaked under his weight. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands hanging between his legs. Close enough to talk, not close enough to crowd. "He's gone," Maddox said. "I know, I heard the car." "He's not coming back." Eli studied Maddox's face for a long time, searching for the thing children in his position always search for. The catch. The hidden cost. The fine print at the bottom of a promise that will eventually reveal itself to be another trap. "People always say that," Eli said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the specific density of words that have been tested against reality and found lightweight. "They said it after the first time my teacher called. They said it after the hospital. They said it every time." "I know they did. So why is this different?" Maddox thought about lying, about offering the kind of reassurance that adults give children because the truth is too complicated or too heavy or too sharp to hand to someone that young. He thought about saying because we're here now, or because the law is on your side, or because things will get better. But this was Eli, and Eli had been lied to by experts, by professionals, by the system. And every lie, no matter how well-intentioned, had taught him the same lesson, that adults use comforting words the way soldiers use smoke screens, to obscure the thing they don't want you to see. "I don't know if it's different," Maddox said. "I don't know what happens Monday in court. I don't know what happens next month or next year. I can't promise you the system works this time because the system has given you every reason not to trust it." Eli's jaw tightened, not in anger, in recognition. The recognition of someone hearing the truth from an adult for what might have been the first time in his life. "What I can tell you," Maddox continued, "is that 5 men just put themselves between you and a loaded gun. Not because they had to, not because someone paid them, not because it was their job, because they decided you mattered. And that decision doesn't have an expiration date. There's no form somebody can file to make it go away. It just is." Eli looked down at his broken arm. at the makeshift splint, at the bruises visible above and below the bandage. The purple-black chronicle of years of damage mapped across his skin like a topography of survival. "I didn't think anyone would come," he said. So quiet, the words almost didn't survive the distance between his mouth and Maddox's ears. "I know. When I asked you that night, in the diner, if someone would wake me up, I didn't think—" He stopped. His chin trembled. The armor, the extraordinary, heartbreaking, impossible armor that a 12-year-old boy had built from nothing but pain and the refusal to let it kill him, developed its first visible crack. "You didn't think anyone would actually be there," Maddox finished. Eli nodded. One tear escaped the eye that could still open. It traveled down his cheek and fell onto the pillow holding his broken arm. A single drop of salt water landing on white fabric, darkening a circle the size of a dime. Maddox didn't reach for the boy, didn't hug him, didn't perform the gestures that movies and television shows insist are the currency of emotional healing. He understood, from the inside, from the specific expertise of having been exactly where Eli was, that what the boy needed right now wasn't contact, it was presence. The steady, unflinching, non-transactional presence of someone who would still be sitting in this chair tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. Not because they wanted something in return, but because showing up was the entire point. "Every damn time," Maddox said. The same words he'd said that first night, but different now, heavier, filled with the weight of everything that had happened between then and now. The garage, the blizzard, the file, the gun, the truck through the wall, the staircase, the 5 rounds emptied from a revolver into a scarred man's palm. Eli looked at him, and for the first time since Maddox had met him, the first time in weeks of careful, patient, agonizing work, the boy's shoulders dropped, not 1 inch, all the way down. The armor folded, the surveillance system powered off, the fortress walls that a 12-year-old had built around himself, the walls that kept him alive but also kept him unreachable, came down with the slow, exhausted, trembling surrender of someone who had finally found a place where the cost of staying guarded exceeded the cost of letting go. Eli leaned forward and pressed his forehead against Maddox's shoulder. Not a hug. Something more primal than a hug. The gesture of an animal that has been running for so long it's forgotten what stillness feels like, finally stopping because the ground beneath it has become trustworthy. Maddox's hand came up and rested on the back of the boy's head, gently, the lightest possible pressure. The touch of a man whose hands had been used for violence and repair in roughly equal measure, choosing repair one more time. They stayed like that for a long time, long enough for the blizzard outside to begin softening, long enough for the sky to start its slow transition from black to the deep, bruised blue that precedes dawn in the Colorado mountains. The courthouse hearing happened on Monday. Webb showed up in a suit that fit better than expected. Darla had taken it in over the weekend, working a sewing machine at the diner counter between coffee refills. He carried a briefcase that no longer had a broken clasp because Reaper had fixed it with a small piece of hardware from the garage, the kind of repair that took 30 seconds and required no explanation. Sarah testified for 90 minutes. She spoke in the steady, methodical voice of a woman who had spent 2 days preparing for this moment with a lawyer who understood that the most powerful testimony isn't dramatic. It's specific. Dates, times, locations. The clinical geography of abuse rendered in language precise enough to withstand cross-examination. Eli didn't testify. Webb made the decision to keep him out of the courtroom, not because the boy's words wouldn't have been powerful, but because a 12-year-old with a broken arm and a black eye sitting in a witness chair was an image that spoke louder than any testimony, and Webb understood that sometimes the most effective thing you can do with evidence is let it exist without narration. The photographs Reaper had taken at the trailer were submitted through proper channels, subpoenaed originals matching the images, authenticated by the court clerk, entered into evidence over the objections of Dale's attorney, a sharp-faced man from Grand Junction named Merritt, who argued chain of custody with the specific aggression of a lawyer who knew his case was crumbling and was throwing procedural objections at it the way you throw sandbags at a flood. The judge, a woman named Catherine Holt, who'd been on the bench for 18 years and had seen enough domestic cases to recognize performance when she heard it, reviewed the trust documents, the custody filing Sarah hadn't known about, the financial records showing transfers from Eli's trust fund into accounts controlled by Dale Whitmore. She reviewed the 3 prior DHS files. She reviewed the emergency room records. She reviewed the photographs of the trailer, the garage, the truck embedded in the wall. She granted the emergency protective order. Full custody to Sarah. No contact. No visitation. Pending criminal proceedings. Dale Whitmore, who appeared in court in an orange jumpsuit from the county jail, showed no reaction. He sat at the defense table with his hands folded and his eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance where the life he'd built and the life he'd destroyed occupied the same space. When the bailiff let him out, he passed within 6 feet of the gallery where Maddox sat. Their eyes met for less than a second. Nothing passed between them. No hatred, no triumph. Nothing. Just 2 men on opposite sides of a line that one of them had crossed years ago and the other had spent his entire life trying not to cross. The door closed behind him, and that was the last time anyone in the Grave Saints ever saw Dale Whitmore. 3 months later, winter finally broke. It happened the way it always happens in Colorado. Not gradually, not gently, but in a single day when the temperature jumped 30 degrees and the snow began retreating up the mountains like an army that had lost its will to fight. Water ran in the streets of Black Hollow. Gutters overflowed. The frozen mud around the garage thawed into actual mud and then, slowly, into something that might eventually become ground again. The garage had been rebuilt. Not professionally. The Saints didn't have that kind of money. But Reaper knew structural welding and Bishop knew carpentry, and Deacon turned out to have an unexpected talent for electrical work that he attributed to 2 semesters at a trade school he'd dropped out of 17 years ago. The new garage door was heavier than the original. The walls were patched and reinforced. The pegboards were rehung, tools reorganized, the space reassembled into a working shop that looked almost the same as before but felt fundamentally different. Because now there was a stool in the corner with ELI scratched into the wood in letters that weren't quite straight. And beside the stool, a toolbox. Small, red, dented, bought by Reaper at a pawn shop in Pueblo, filled with wrenches and screwdrivers and socket sets sized for hands that were still growing. Eli came to the garage every day after school. His arm had healed. 6 weeks in a cast that the Saints had signed with their road names and crude drawings of motorcycles that looked like they'd been rendered by men who could build the machines but couldn't draw them to save their lives. The cast came off on a Tuesday. Eli flexed his wrist experimentally, testing the rebuilt bone the way you test a repaired engine. Carefully, incrementally, with the specific attention of someone who understands that things that have been broken are both weaker and stronger than things that haven't. Maddox taught him primary chain adjustment that afternoon. They worked side by side on the Softail. The same bike they'd started together weeks ago, the one that had been knocked off its stand when the truck came through the wall and sustained damage that took 3 weeks to assess and another 2 to repair. "Hand me the torque wrench," Maddox said. Eli handed it over. Their fingers touched on the exchange. Neither of them flinched. That was new. That was everything. Sarah worked at the diner now. Darla had offered her a job the morning after the arrest. Not out of charity, but because Darla's knees were giving out and she needed someone who could carry plates and make coffee and handle the particular demands of a roadside diner that served bikers and truckers and the occasional lost tourist who'd wandered off the highway looking for something that didn't exist on GPS. Sarah was good at it. She had the kind of efficiency that comes from years of managing a household under siege. The ability to track multiple tasks simultaneously, to anticipate needs before they were expressed, to move through a space with the quiet competence of someone who'd learned that visibility was dangerous, but who was slowly, tentatively, learning that it didn't have to be. She laughed sometimes now. Not often, not loudly, but the sound existed in the diner's atmosphere the way the coffee smell existed. Present, warm, evidence that the building contained something alive. Gunner's daughter called him on a Wednesday. He was sitting on the bench outside the garage cleaning a carburetor in a bucket of solvent when his phone rang with a number he'd memorized but hadn't seen on his screen in 11 months. He answered it with hands that were covered in solvent and shaking in a way that had nothing to do with chemicals. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. She didn't say much. He said less. But when he hung up, he sat on that bench for 20 minutes without moving, staring at the phone in his chemical-stained hand with an expression that defied description. Something between devastation and repair, like watching a house being rebuilt from the foundation up, one brick at a time, by someone who wasn't sure they deserved to live in it, but was willing to try. Nobody asked him about it. Deacon set a cup of coffee on the bench beside him and walked away. That was enough. The night it happened was a Thursday. Eli had been working on the Softail alone, Maddox letting him handle the final reassembly, standing 10 feet away pretending to organize wrenches while actually watching the boy's hands with the critical eye of a master mechanic evaluating an apprentice who didn't know he was being evaluated. The bike was done. Every component cleaned, rebuilt, adjusted, torqued to spec. The engine sat in the frame like a heart returned to a chest. Silent now, but ready. Eli turned the key, thumbed the starter. The Harley turned over on the first try. The sound filled the garage. That deep, uneven, potato-potato rumble that Harley-Davidsons have been making for over a century. The sound of controlled explosions channeled through steel and iron and into the air where it becomes something more than noise. It becomes a pulse, a declaration that the machine is alive and the hands that rebuilt it understood what they were doing. Eli listened to the engine with his eyes closed, not the squinting closure of pain or fear, the peaceful closure of someone listening to music. His hands rested on the tank, feeling the vibration travel through metal and into his palms and up his arms, and into his chest, where it settled against his ribcage like a second heartbeat. Maddox watched from across the garage. He didn't speak, didn't praise, didn't perform. Just watched a boy listen to the sound of something he'd fixed with his own hands and understood that the engine wasn't the only thing in this building that had been rebuilt. The boy worked until 9:30. Then his eyes started closing on their own. The involuntary surrender of a body that had been burning energy at the rate of someone who was finally, after years of survival mode existence, beginning to spend that energy on growth instead of defense. He fell asleep on the floor beside the Softail, head on his jacket, arms at his sides, not crossed over his chest, not curled into a protective shell, just resting, open. The posture of a child who had, at some point during the weeks and months of oil-stained afternoons and engine noise, and the quiet, steady presence of damaged men who'd chosen to be something other than what their damage demanded, learned that sleep didn't have to be an act of surrender, that sleep could be safe. Maddox found him 40 minutes later. He crouched beside the boy the way he'd crouched 100 times before. Slowly, carefully, the controlled descent of a large man making himself small enough to exist at a child's level without casting a shadow that could be mistaken for a threat. A comic book lay across Eli's chest, one of the ones Reaper still left on the workbench every week, pretending he forgot them, maintaining the fiction long past the point where anyone believed it, but continuing because the ritual itself had become a kind of language, a weekly wordless repetition of the same message. You are known. You are expected. There is something here that was left for you on purpose. Hey, little man, Maddox whispered. Time to wake up. Eli's eyes opened. There was a half-second of the old panic, the autonomic flash of a nervous system that had been wired for danger since before conscious memory and would probably carry that wiring for years to come, maybe forever. But it passed, faster than it used to. The panic recognized the voice, recognized the face, recognized the environment, and stood down. The boy looked up at Maddox. His eyes were clear, both of them. The swelling had been gone for weeks. The bruises had faded from purple to yellow to the specific shade of nothing. That means the skin has forgiven what was done to it, even if the memory hasn't. You really did wake me up, Eli said. The words landed on Maddox like a hand placed gently on a wound he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it was there. The wound of his own childhood, of his own unanswered question, of the 9-year-old boy he'd been in a barracks bathroom with a razor blade, asking the empty room if anyone would notice if he stopped existing. Nobody had answered him then, but he'd answered Eli. And in the answering, in the act of becoming for someone else the thing that nobody had been for him, something inside Maddox's creed that had been broken for 30 years shifted into a position it had never occupied before, not healed. Healing was a word for greeting cards and therapist offices. This was something rougher than healing, rawer, more honest. The mechanical reality of a fractured thing that had been set properly for the first time and was beginning, slowly, imperfectly, with all the grinding discomfort that genuine repair entails, to grow back together. "Every damn time," Maddox said. His voice broke on the last word. Just slightly, just enough for the boy to hear it and understand that the man crouching beside him was not made of stone, that strength and fragility lived in the same body, that the hands capable of disarming a man on a staircase were the same hands capable of resting on a boy's head with a gentleness that bordered on reverence. Eli sat up, rubbed his eyes, looked at the soft tail beside him, the machine they'd rebuilt together, piece by piece, over weeks that had transformed from a mechanical project into something neither of them had the vocabulary to name, but both of them recognized in the wordless, bone-deep way that survivors recognize the moment when surviving becomes living. Outside, the Colorado night was clear for the first time in months. Stars visible. Air cold but not cruel. The kind of night that exists as evidence that seasons change and darkness is temporary, and the sky, when it finally decides to stop punishing the ground below it, is capable of extraordinary, unreasonable beauty. A Harley rumbled somewhere in the distance. Reaper, probably, coming back from wherever he went on the nights when the noise inside his own head required the counter noise of an engine and an empty road and the wind hitting his face hard enough to feel like forgetting. The neon sign above the diner flickered, still half burned out, still reading "eat" instead of whatever it was supposed to say. But the A had stopped stuttering. Someone, Deacon, with his unexpected electrical skills, had rewired it over the weekend. It glowed steady now, a small, persistent, imperfect light in the darkness. Maddox stood up, extended his hand. Eli took it, and the man pulled the boy to his feet in a garage that smelled like motor oil and coffee, and the indefinable scent of a place where broken things were brought to be made whole, not by magic, not by luck, not by any force more mystical than the stubborn, scarred, profoundly imperfect hands of people who'd decided that giving up wasn't an option, and that the world, for all its cruelty, still contained rooms where the light stayed on and the door stayed open, and someone was always, always there to wake you up. Not every family is born. Some are built in garages during blizzards by wounded men who learned too late that the thing they were searching for on every road and in every bottle and behind every mile of empty highway was never a destination. It was a reason to stop, and a boy standing by a jukebox gave them one.